From the Caribbean islands to the east coast of the United States, a deadly drug gang makes millions. But its leader remains a mystery. As their cocaine trafficking business thrives, the violence rages out of control. To destroy the gang, agents and police know they must identify the leader and take him down.
Nobody should die that way.
I've never seen anything that horrific.
One of the duties of a pathologist is to determine the cause of death.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required. Download Veely now.
The United States is one of the most profitable drug markets in the world. For ruthless and sophisticated drug traffickers, it is truly the land of opportunity. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. In the 1990s, a violent drug organization moved thousands of kilos of Colombian cocaine through the Virgin Islands and into Georgia. It would take a task force of dedicated agents and police to shut down this multi-million-dollar operation and destroy a cocaine empire.
The U.S. Virgin Islands are a tourist's paradise. Lush tropical islands and miles of sandy beaches, all in America's backyard. But these islands hold a dark secret. Law enforcement refers to them as the cocaine funnel. Because they are located halfway between South America and the U.S. mainland, drug gangs use the islands to ship large amounts of cocaine into the U.S. Starting in the early 90s, a drug gang called the Island Boys shipped thousands of kilos of cocaine into the U.S. through the Virgin Islands. They chose the unlikely city of Augusta, Georgia as their main point of entry. There they turned the cocaine into crack. FBI Special Agent Tim Cox.
It was primarily the population that drew them in. At the time, there were several projects that were ripe for selling crack cocaine. It's also a 2-hour city. You're 2 hours away from Atlanta. You're 2 hours away from Savannah.
But the competition between the Island Boys and local drug gangs is brutal. Eugene Smalls runs the Augusta operation for the Island Boys. Business is good. In 1991, the gang is raking in millions. And Smalls makes a big target. There are rumors he keeps $1 million in cash in his safety deposit box. He wears the key around his neck. By the time Augusta police arrive, Eugene Small's safety deposit box is empty, and the powerful drug dealer is fighting for his life. He survives, but his injuries are severe. The rising violence in Augusta concerns police, and the Island Boys are at the center of it. The Augusta police discuss the problem with the FBI. They start by explaining what they know about the gang.
The local authorities, through their contacts with informants and some of the arrests that they'd made previously, knew that there was an increasing number of these gentlemen coming up from the Virgin Islands. The informants had given indication that they were moving more and more cocaine into the area.
In October 1992, the FBI and U.S. Customs worked to build a federal conspiracy case against the Island Boys. Cox suspects the Island Boys are working with a major Colombian cocaine cartel. One thing is clear, they are as mysterious as they are deadly.
We didn't have any inroads into the group, so we were having to put together as much intel as we could by bits and pieces.
Agents assemble photos of suspected gang members taken by the local drug squad. Former U.S. Customs agent Larry Sapp.
So we didn't even know who they were. We'd put them in there to see if somebody would later identify them.
They also scour every report they can find that has any connection to the Island Boys. One report stands out. A month earlier, 2 DEA agents spotted Eugene Smalls at the airport in Atlanta. Despite his injuries, the local drug boss personally picked up a passenger on a flight from the Virgin Islands. The DEA decided to follow Smalls. Agents radioed the Georgia Highway Patrol and asked them to pull the car over for speeding.
DEA had enough of following them and joined the locals there and they got them all out of the car, searched them, took all their money, tried to interview them all.
I can't walk.
Smalls could barely walk. His passenger, James Springette, was carrying a passport from the U.S. Virgin Islands. Agents also searched the car. They found nothing. No drugs, no weapons, and surprisingly little cash. The DEA photographed the 2 men as well as their credit cards and IDs and had to let them go. Agents can use the credit card information to track the movements of all 4 suspects. But there's also a downside.
Then they know that they've been watched or being watched and may affect their behavior in the future. They may be more careful of surveillances and more careful of movements and things of this nature.
Agents wonder about James Springette. Who is he and what role does he play? Eugene Smalls picked him up at the airport personally, even though Smalls was still recovering from bullet wounds. Obviously, James Springette is important. Special Agent Cox contacts the local police to see if they have any information.
Yes, Officer Cox. Got anything on?
The Richmond County Sheriff's Department Narcotics Squad have been fighting the gang since it first arrived in Augusta. But they have never heard of James Springette. If law enforcement hopes to take down the Island Boys, they're going to have to do it the hard way, from the bottom up.
We started on the street level, doing surveillances when we could, getting information from the local authorities, and trying to develop some other inroads into the group.
Again, they hit a brick wall. The Island Boys have a dangerous reputation. Even paid informants are afraid to talk about the group.
It was hard to develop informants because this group was known to be violent, and informants were afraid to do anything with them because they had a reputation for hurting and killing people.
Federal authorities conduct surveillance. They observe that members of the gang frequently use motel rooms to do business. After they check out, teams of agents search their rooms.
You'd be surprised that you find phone numbers, photos, different things. This whole case was like somebody that had filled a room with puzzle pieces and we're trying to dig our way out and figure out who is who.
The pressure is constant and intense. Too intense for Eugene Smalls, the head of the Augusta Island Boys.
We were putting a lot of heat on him.
Eugene Smalls decides to relocate to Virginia.
I personally think that the reason Eugene left was things were getting too hot for them around Augusta.
In Smalls' absence, a man named Shaim Gabriel becomes the new leader of the Island Boys operation in Augusta, Georgia. Agent Sapp alerts Virginia authorities. Eugene Smalls is heading their way.
They were on him as soon as he got up there and worked him and ran a good case up there.
Smalls is arrested in Virginia Beach for drug trafficking and eventually convicted and sentenced to 90 years in prison. In Augusta, agents focus on Shaim Gabriel, the new leader of the Island Boys. They suspect the gang is bringing drugs in through the Atlanta airport.
When you look at the amount of money that they were running, plus the amount of cocaine that we knew they were putting on the street, it was obvious they were having to run lots of loads of luggage through and use lots of couriers.
On June 14, 1995, agents in Atlanta find a suitcase containing 7 kilos, more than 15 pounds of cocaine.
James, we can change this around. Who you delivering the coke to?
Investigators question the courier.
James.
He tells agents the drugs were going to Shaim Gabriel in Augusta.
Shaim Gabriel.
We had enough corroborating information, through phone tolls and things to substantiate exactly what the courier was saying.
Based on the courier's statement, authorities are able to obtain an arrest warrant and a warrant to search Gabriel's home. On June 15, 1995, authorities serve both warrants. As the agents close in, they have no idea what Gabriel has waiting for them behind his door. In Augusta, Georgia, the FBI, along with U.S. Customs and local police, work to take down a violent drug gang. Investigators arrest Shaim Gabriel, the man they believe is the new head of the Island Boys in Augusta. Gabriel is accused of attempting to receive 7 kilos of cocaine from a courier from the Virgin Islands. A search of his home turns up documents, photos, and $15,000 in ones. Special Agent Tim Cox.
Apparently, Shaim felt it was beneath him to spend dollar bills, so he wouldn't spend dollar bills, he would stuff them in these jars.
For law enforcement, Gabriel's arrest is a big success, but it doesn't stop the Island Boys. As soon as authorities take Gabriel into custody, agents suspect that new leaders are already emerging to take over the gang.
Whenever we would take people off from the group, make an arrest or anything else, other people from the islands would arrive back in the States and take their place in the group, distributing around Augusta area.
Investigators continue to go after the Island Boys using the same techniques they used to take down Gabriel. But it's not working. It seems the Island Boys have changed tactics. They must be using another means of getting their drugs past customs at the airport. Agents have to find it. Customs expands its searches, both in the Virgin Islands and in U.S. airports. On February 6, 1996, agents get a break when a random customs check finds cocaine in a suitcase arriving in Atlanta. The bag belongs to a teenage girl from a housing project in Augusta. The gang has been eluding police by using couriers that don't fit the usual profile. Former U.S. Customs agent Larry Sapp.
They would find young girls that had no money, no future, and ask them would they like to go to the Virgin Islands for a week, free vacation. And of course, anyone would say yes, and the only stipulation was you had to bring back a package for them.
These were easily influenced young people that just saw an opportunity to make some money. Granted, it was illegal, but in a sense, they were victims of this group as well. They couldn't bring a lot to the table for us, but what they could tell us is who offered the deal, what the deal was.
The courier tells investigators she was hired by the girlfriend of Brian Gustav. Shortly after Gabriel's arrest, Gustav and his girlfriend arrived from the Virgin Islands. They've been running the Augusta Island Boys. The girl also gives them the names of other women who have worked as couriers. It takes more than a year to gather all the evidence against the new local leaders, but investigators have enough to arrest Gustav and his girlfriend. Brian Gustav is convicted of drug trafficking. His girlfriend takes a plea deal. agents have taken out the leadership of the Island Boys in Augusta once again.
When you do take them down and the next week the same group is up and operating again, it gets a little frustrating, but that's why we work to go up and get to the head of the organization, because that's eventually the only way you're going to be able to stop them.
Arresting drug dealers in Augusta is not stopping the flow of drugs into the U.S. Agents know they must find out who is running the Island Boys operation. Their leader must be in the Virgin Islands.
In 1996, the U.S. Virgin Islands became designated a HIDA, which stands for High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area.
Detective Chris Howell is on the DEA task force formed to target drug traffickers in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
2 minutes out. And up until this time frame, there hadn't been a lot of targeting of these people with established routes and cocaine trafficking. So the traffickers, by this point in the game, had become pretty powerful, and they had a lot at their disposal. So we had a lot of catching up to do.
Agents begin questioning informants and learn that in St. Croix, a prominent local family is involved in the cocaine shipments from Colombia.
Intelligence information that was gained from confidential sources stated that one of the family members was the St. Croix girlfriend of James Springette.
Investigators recognize the name. In 1992, DEA agents photographed Springette after Eugene Smalls picked him up at the Atlanta airport.
And that informant also told us that he was the biggest drug trafficker in the islands. And so our focus kind of started to begin to switch focus from this prominent family over to James Springette.
Investigators discover that Springette's girlfriend has more than half a dozen cell phones in her name. These phones may hold the key to cracking this dangerous drug gang.
When we began to look at those phones and look at the toll information off those phones, other names that came up through informant information began to appear on those tolls. And it was obvious that this girl had, something to do with what was going on.
While agents pursue the cell phone lead, they continue to work the streets. From informants, agents learn that a small shipment of cocaine is scheduled to leave St. Thomas via seaplane. The surveillance team spots a suspected courier carrying a cardboard box aboard. The seaplane takes off for the largest of the U.S. Virgin Islands, St. Croix.
We let them board the plane and get airborne on their way back to St. Croix. And we established surveillance where they were going to dock here in St. Croix.
When the seaplane lands, Detective Chris Howell and the DEA are waiting. They suspect the box the courier is carrying is full of cocaine. Agents are in place for a routine takedown, but the plan changes. Something has spooked the courier. Agents must move in.
The individual who was carrying the box ran straight to the ocean, jumped off the dock into the ocean. As he tore into the box, kilograms of cocaine began to float out into the water.
The courier is trying to destroy the evidence.
He knew that if he could get those packages open, once that cocaine hit the water, it would just dissolve into nothing. But I wasn't going to take any chance. I wanted to get all 7 kilograms. I didn't want him to tear into anything.
Detective Howell rescues several kilos of evidence and a cell phone purchased by Springette's girlfriend. The courier is in serious trouble and he knows it. Still, he refuses to tell authorities who he's working for.
In the islands, it's very rare to see people cooperate. Very rare. When we arrest somebody, even when they're facing serious jail time, they'll just do their time, and that's it.
As a result of the operation, the Island Boys are now on high alert. They know the feds are watching them. They quickly change their tactics.
Springette made an executive decision that they wouldn't bring cocaine directly into the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Instead, the gang will use the island of Tortola to warehouse their drug shipments.
The British Virgin Islands is literally a 5 or 10 minute boat ride away from St. Thomas. So you could be in British waters and a minute later and you're in U.S. waters, or international waters for that matter.
As a British possession, Tortola is outside the jurisdiction of U.S. law enforcement. On June 19, 1996, the Island Boys bring 1.5 tons of cocaine on shore in Tortola.
You're talking about loads that are worth millions and millions of dollars at a time. And very rarely does a group run that much dope without having some firepower behind them.
Heavily armed Colombians are present to verify the delivery.
Those people's job was not only to look after the South American interest, but also to protect the load.
Cocaine is loaded into 2 vehicles, a truck and a van. This shipment is so important that James Springette personally oversees the transfer. The 2 vehicles head for a safe house to store the cocaine. The drug dealers are unaware the Royal Virgin Island police are waiting for them. Officers have been watching the van for over a month. Every 2 weeks, it travels from the east end of the island to the west end, weighted down with something heavy.
They suspected it could be drug trafficking, but they also suspected it might have been involved in some burglaries that had been occurring on the east end of the island.
When a pickup and van approach, the Royal Virgin Island police move in. The pickup manages to squeeze through the roadblock, but the van is stopped in its tracks.
Hands up! Out of the car! Out of the car now! Out of the car! Move! Put your hands up right now!
The suspects open fire with automatic weapons. The police are outgunned.
Most of them had 6-shot revolvers, shotguns with 3 rounds, and weaponry of this nature, and they stood up and returned fire against automatic M16s, firing at full burst.
One officer is hit.
The round passed out the side of his head, and he was lying in a pool of blood on the street. And so they basically, at that point, began to try to keep him alive.
The van gets away. The wounded officer is rushed to a hospital.
Just wondered that just the shock, the impact alone didn't kill him. But it put his eye out, and they got him to a hospital. He lost his eye, but he did live.
The next day, police find the van a mile down the road. The tires, the radiator, and the engine have been shot to pieces. In the back of the van, police find 1,260 kilograms of cocaine. They also find night vision goggles, GPS devices, and lights for signaling aircraft. The Royal Virgin Island police believe the drug runners will try to escape to a nearby island. They contact police commissioners in the U.S. Virgin Islands and the surrounding area asking for help. Authorities know they must locate these dangerous men fast. If they're willing to shoot a cop, no one is safe. In the British Virgin Islands, a firefight erupts between heavily armed drug runners and the Royal Police. The drug runners make a daring escape, but investigators seize a van full of cocaine. The Royal Police warn their counterparts on the surrounding islands to be on the lookout.
It was almost like a Caribbean all-points bulletin.
Detective Chris Howell.
They put it out to all the police officers that this occurred, and to be a lookout on the beaches and so forth, marinas, docks, boat yards and everything, that these individuals may be heading our way.
Police around the islands are on the alert for anything unusual. Early the next morning, officers stop a suspicious boat. There are no drugs or weapons aboard, but there is a large amount of cash.
They were questioned and then later released by police, as there wasn't enough evidence at the time to hold them. Those individuals were linked through informant information as being Springette's boat crew.
They were the same boat crew that brought in the cocaine that had been recovered by police in Tortola. A few days later, U.S. Virgin Island police find the body of one of the men from the boat. He's been shot in the head twice, execution style.
To me, all that was an indication that Springette's organization was not going to accept failure. There had to be a cost to losing that load, even if that meant the life of one of his own.
At the roadblock, the gunman may have escaped. But the cocaine they lost was worth millions.
You don't lose 1,260 kilograms of cocaine without someone paying for it. Springette had to go back to South America and explain this to the people he was getting cocaine from. And he didn't want to go back without there being a body attached to the loss.
For Springette, it's a temporary setback.
Kilograms of cocaine during this time frame were almost on every commercial flight heading to the U.S. mainland. They had dirty baggage handlers that would put cocaine in bags, sneak them past customs, put them on the aircraft, and then a mule would actually take custody of that bag when it arrived in a U.S. city and move it on forward.
In Georgia, FBI Special Agent Tim Cox and Customs Agent Larry Sapp are working leads of their own. They've been watching a man named Ronnie Pemberton. They believe he's the latest drug dealer to head the Augusta branch of the Island Boys. 3 months after the Tortola shootout, FBI Special Agent Tim Cox decides to send a message to Pemberton at the Atlanta airport.
I had heard through our street sources that Pemberton had called me a punk and said we were never going to catch him. And so I thought I would at least introduce myself. So I went to the airport when he came back in and went up and introduced myself and said, "Hi, Ronnie, welcome back to the country. I'll be around. Come see me if you'd ever like to talk."
But as agents know, Island Boys never talk. Months pass. In the Virgin Islands in early 1997, the two agents get the break they've been waiting for. A member of the Island Boys sells cocaine out of a hotel room in St. Thomas. A fellow gang member and a buyer sent to kill the dealer pay him a surprise visit. The Island Boy tries to warn his friend by using a special knock signaling danger. The dealer gets the message. He escapes out a back window. The island is a small place to try and hide. Gang members are everywhere. The terrified dealer secretly turns himself in to authorities. In exchange for protection, he agrees to tell the FBI what he knows about the Island Boys and their dealings in Georgia.
Both Larry Sapp and I were very excited because we knew that if we actually had someone that could identify more of these people and put us in touch with the routes they use, the methods they're using to transport this stuff, it could be a huge break in the case.
Former U.S. Customs Agent Larry Sapp.
He was the first one to give us all the ins and outs, who was the leaders, how they smuggled, how they distributed, who were distributors, and things of this nature. It's a real big break in the case.
Agents are finally starting to get inside this dangerous gang. They begin trying to make their case against the suspected leader, James Springette.
We would search customs travel records. We would find out when he had gone in and out of different countries. We would find out when he would show up on either wire intercepts or show up in conversation with someone else. By doing that and by tracking the shipments, you can put Jimmy in the same area. This all goes to circumstantial evidence and ties Jimmy with it.
Springette is careful to keep his hands clean. He does his dirty work through intermediaries and rarely comes in contact with the coke. At the same time, on the island of St. Croix, the DEA convinces a federal judge to allow them to wiretap the prominent family suspected of drug smuggling and of having ties to Springette.
We applied for the first ever Title III in Virgin Islands history.
DEA agents secretly install the wiretap in a switching station and hide the equipment.
We had already received information that they had individuals that worked within the phone company that were checking their phones regularly to see if they were tapped. And so we had to hide that equipment within the phone company's regular wiring.
For 1 month during the summer of 1997, investigators listen to the wiretap and conduct simultaneous surveillance. They hear frequent references to Springette's girlfriend, but nothing concrete. The Island boys are careful about what they say on the phone.
You could tell the conversation was starting to get good. And the next thing that we would hear is, "Let me call you back." And then surveillance, watch him hang up the phone, jump in his car, and drive down to a payphone, and he'd finish the call at the payphone. Almost from the onset, they knew we were on that phone. Certainly when you go up on a wire, you expect when the wire goes down, there's going to be a roundup very shortly thereafter. We weren't there with this wire.
The wiretap does provide enough evidence to justify search warrants. On August 7th, agents launched simultaneous raids on 22 island homes and businesses. They have enough to go after several members of the Island Boys gang, but they need a lot more to take down James Springette and dismantle his entire drug trafficking organization. In the Virgin Islands, the DEA and police raid 22 locations. They need enough evidence to put suspected drug lord James Springette out of business forever. His girlfriend's house is a prime target. In her bedroom, agents find $500,000 in cash and a business card for an attorney in Panama. They also find Springette's U.S. passport. The passport is stamped with the dates the drug lord visited other Caribbean islands, as well as Colombia, Venezuela, and Europe. By comparing those dates to intelligence on large drug shipments, agents can show whether Springette was in the same country when the drugs arrived. Virgin Islands Police Detective Chris Howell flies up to Augusta, Georgia to meet with FBI Special Agent Tim Cox and Customs Agent Larry Sapp.
We hooked up with Chris Howell, and it was another one of those breaks in the case. Chris had a wealth of information down there about activities in St. Thomas. We had a wealth of information about activities going on in the States. And when we compared the two, we found out that his departures were our arrivals. We cross-matched some of the trips, who was going, who was coming. It was great information that we were able to collaborate on.
Authorities finally have enough circumstantial evidence to nail James Springette.
Independently, we could have probably put together a case in the islands, and likewise, they probably had the ability to do that there in Georgia. But you combine the two cases together, it seems like it's an unstoppable force.
Chris Howell wants all the cases tried in Georgia. It will be too difficult to convict Springette in the Virgin Islands.
He had evolved into a monster by this point. I mean, he was very well established in South America. He had his own routes here. He had his own assets available to him. So anything you can throw into that on your end is beneficial.
It would help their case if they could find a more specific link between Springette and the cocaine shipments. Agents review the evidence one more time.
When we had done the search warrant at Springette's St. Croix girlfriend's house, we had found business cards for a Panamanian attorney, and we also found business cards in the name of Omega Sea Cargo.
According to customs records, a freighter owned by Omega Sea Cargo was stopped a few months after the Tortola shootout. The ship was searched. 8 tons of Colombian cocaine was found in the cargo. Working on a hunch, agents research Omega Sea Cargo. The company is owned by James Springette.
It was huge. It was a huge chunk of the case right there. I mean, now we had 6,000 kilograms on Mr. Springette. That was a good feeling.
Federal authorities develop a plan to dismantle the Island Boys, starting in Augusta, Georgia. December 15th, 1997. Ronnie Pemberton, the local head of the Augusta gang, attempts to buy 2 kilos of cocaine from a Virgin Islands supplier. The FBI is watching. In the motel room next door, Customs Agent Larry Sapp and FBI Special Agents Tim Cox and Mike Varicalli videotaped the buy via hidden camera.
Our ultimate goal was to tie the organization all the way back to a Colombian connection and find out where the drugs were being processed and at what point they were being handed over to Springette and his organization so we could get to the highest level we possibly could.
Ronnie Pemberton came in, met the informant. We got it all on video with him holding up the keys and hand balancing, weighing to see which one weighed a little more than the other.
Pemberton takes his time examining the bags of cocaine.
Finally, he picked two he wanted.
All right, roll over. Sit up.
Special Agent Tim Cox personally arrests Pemberton.
I said, "Hello, Ronnie, remember me from the airport?" And he nodded, and I said, "Well, who's the punk now?"
Shortly after Pemberton's arrest, FBI Special Agent Tim Cox is promoted and transferred.
It's a bittersweet pill because I was with this case since its inception. I knew we were headed towards taking Jimmy Springette off, but I also knew I would not be there for the finish.
Cox leaves Special Agent Mike Varicalli in charge of the Island Boys investigation. Over the next few months, Varicalli and his team continue methodically building a case against Springette and the Island Boys.
The more we looked into it, the more we uncovered. 10,000 kilograms turned into 20,000, which turned into 50,000.
Less than a year after Pemberton's arrest, an Augusta grand jury delivers indictments against Springette, his girlfriend, and 5 of his closest associates.
We had a sealed indictment for quite a long time, and we're just building a case. We were building a story. We were basically building our case for court. We identified individuals, we identified assets.
Investigators want to arrest all suspects simultaneously so that none of them can run. But there's a snag. Springette has gone into hiding.
It was a frustrating time period because here we are ready for this party and we can't find our main guy.
Springette is smart and careful.
He did not use the phone unnecessarily. He did not spend a lot of time in one location, and he tended to reside in areas where the U.S. government didn't have complete access and total reach.
For 2 long months, authorities can't find him. Then, in Medellin, Colombia, the case takes a dramatic turn.
Please have a seat.
A local woman approaches DEA agents.
How can we help you?
She tells them she knows a big American drug dealer. His name is James Springette. In Medellin, Colombia, DEA agents get a big break in the search for drug trafficker James Springette. An informant claims she knows where Springette lives.
She basically walked into the DEA office there and agreed to cooperate with law enforcement.
How can I help you?
Detective Chris Howell.
She indicated he had a penthouse apartment in Medellin. We knew the apartment existed, we just didn't know where it was. The apartment had like muraled ceilings, solid gold faucets, a very expensive apartment.
The woman agrees to give the DEA the location of Springette's apartment. In exchange, she wants a fresh start for her family in the witness protection program.
We've been looking for him.
Authorities agree to the deal. Special Agent Mike Varicalli.
Springette was pretty well insulated in Medellin, Colombia. It seems to be a haven for high-ranking drug organization members, so it's traditionally difficult to locate and apprehend an individual for drugs in Medellin.
The DEA requests an arrest warrant from the FBI and U.S. Customs in Augusta, Georgia. Former U.S. Customs agent Larry Sapp.
The agent there called me and asked me, do we actually, in fact, have a warrant for James Springette? Of course, I enthusiastically told him yes. He asked for me to fax down the fingerprints, the pictures, and all the stuff he would need to get him picked up.
The DEA also contacts trusted members of the Colombian police. 2 Colombian police officers stake out Springette's luxury apartment, waiting for him to appear. To the Colombians, it looks like Springette is leaving for good. They have to move fast.
They felt like their surveillance was burned, and they better go ahead and arrest him, and that's what they did.
The officers don't have time to wait for backup. They move in.
Those 2 stopped the vehicle and arrested Springette and his driver by themselves, which we thought was mighty courageous.
Special Agent Tim Cox.
When I first heard that they had him in custody down in Colombia, I was elated. This was the culmination of a 14-year investigation, which started from the lowest level street dealers all the way up to the made man with the Colombian mafia who had the direct Colombian connection supplying cocaine.
Agents from the FBI, Customs, and the DEA converge on the Virgin Islands to arrest Springette's associates. Local drug dealers quickly retreat into their fortified mansions.
We probably got dope dealers flushing their dope everywhere on St. Croix.
One mansion on St. Thomas is so remote and well protected that Virgin Island police have to rappel down the cliff above it and approach it from the rear.
They had walls up around the house, electric gates. There was a real security issue on how we could do these things successfully.
House by house, the task force arrests the leadership of the Island Boys. Although they finally have Springette in custody, getting him back to the U.S. proves to be far more difficult than anyone had ever imagined.
He's in custody in Colombia, yeah, and that's the big problem, because extradition out of Colombia is a difficult task, and what made it more difficult is he had citizenship at that point in Colombia.
Investigators will now have to go through a long bureaucratic process to try to extradite him back to the U.S.
It's like beating a dead horse. I mean, there's nothing you can really do to speed the process. You put in the request and it goes through the channels and then you just wait.
I knew that the longer Jimmy was down there, the longer we didn't have him on American soil in our custody, the greater the chance that he would either escape or someone would break him out.
While in prison, Springette pays to have luxuries brought in to pass the time in comfort.
They have people that wait on them, kind of like orderlies, to go to get them stuff. And if they can't leave the penitentiary, they'll go outside the penitentiary and get it and bring it back to them.
On March 1st, 2000, a few days before his extradition becomes final, Springette orders a new mattress.
When the new mattress was delivered to his cell, he was able to insert himself in the new mattress. It was just wide enough to fit his body, and the individual that brought the mattress to him aided him in sewing the mattress back up. So there was no hole, there was no evidence that someone had been inserted into the mattress.
One of the most dangerous drug dealers in the world is carried out of his cell past unsuspecting guards. American drug trafficker James Springette attempts a daring escape from a prison in Colombia sealed inside a mattress. FBI Special Agent Tim Cox.
Jimmy got into the mattress. They stitched him back up in there and proceeded to carry him through, I think, about 5 checkpoints, getting him out of the prison.
An investigation later shows that Springette paid more than $3 million in bribes to set up his incredible escape. Investigators take the news hard.
James Springette has escaped. He's gone, man.
I'd put 10 years of my investigative career into eventually getting this guy, and now he was gone. I was completely deflated. We had a hard enough time catching him the first time. It was my fear that because he'd been caught one time, that we'd never be able to get him again.
Detective Chris Howell.
We're back at ground zero trying to figure out where do we go from here. at that point, we have no idea to even, where to look. We have no leads. We have no idea. He could have been anywhere in the world.
Agents notify FBI legal attachés at U.S. embassies throughout Latin America. They also notify customs and DEA agents working in those countries. FBI Special Agent Mike Varacalli.
We basically contacted Interpol. We contacted all the countries we know he has ties to and got the word out as far as where he last was, what he looks like.
There was rumors starting to spread that he had had reconstructive surgery, to change his appearance and everything, and it just kind of became like this urban legend, this guy who was out there, but no one knew how to find him.
According to rumors, Springette is living somewhere in Latin America and running his organization by phone.
Jimmy, just like anybody else, has to have an income. When you're spending $5 million on an escape and you're living the lifestyle that he's accustomed to doing, you have to have an income. So he had started generating that income again.
In April 2002, the FBI adds Springette to their list of top 10 fugitives.
And to put him on the FBI top most wanted list during this time frame was major because, he was sharing poster space with guys like Osama bin Laden at that point.
Investigators also play a few long shots. They set up surveillance on a drug dealer known to be part of Springette's group. Agents wait until they have probable cause and then search him. They find a large amount of cocaine and take him into custody.
Help us find your uncle. You'll do a lot less time.
Investigators pressure the dealer.
What city is he in?
I don't know.
What country is he in?
He decides to talk. He tells them Springette now lives in Venezuela. He doesn't know which city, he only knows the phone number. The FBI legal attaché in Venezuela gives the phone number to an elite team of trusted local police officers. Using the phone number and informants, the Venezuelan police locate Springette's home and stake it out.
Springette offered $2 to $3 million to let him walk away from the scene.
There are many honest law enforcement officials that there's no amount of money that would entice them to do that. Thankfully, we had some down in Venezuela.
FBI, DEA, and customs agents work to get Springette back to the U.S. as soon as possible.
The Venezuelan authorities declared him persona non grata because he's in the country on a false passport and ordered him to be removed from the country immediately.
Less than 24 hours after the arrest, Venezuelan police hand Springette over to FBI and customs agents at the airport. Agents fly him back to the United States.
He knew that he wouldn't stand a chance going to trial in Augusta, Georgia, with all the evidence that had been, mounted against him. I think he knew the only thing he had available to him and his only chance of ever having, the chance to see the light of day again would be to accept a plea agreement.
Springette pleads guilty to one count of conspiracy to import cocaine. The notorious drug lord is sentenced to 35 years. Without parole.
Hard to beat the significance of this investigation. When you talk about a street-level case being worked all the way up to a 10 most wanted and an ultimate capture, it's kind of hard to beat that. It's definitely a highlight of my career.
In a world where money is everything and life means nothing, a drug gang stalks the streets of Chicago. They are heavily armed, well-funded, and have dangerous international contacts. It will take every weapon in the FBI's arsenal to stop a deadly threat known as the El Rukns.
In the 1980s, the drug trade ravaged Chicago's inner-city neighborhoods. Heroin and cocaine sales soared. Violent crime threatened to destroy the community. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. As drug profits grew, gangs ruled the streets. One of the most dangerous was called El Rukn. Agents teamed up with state and local police to bring them down, but in the process, uncovered a bizarre and frightening terrorist plot.
Chicago, Illinois. In the early 1980s, it is one of the deadliest major cities in America. Powerful drug gangs have transformed the South Side from a neighborhood into a war zone. To combat the rising tide of violence, the FBI forms the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. In Chicago, their prime target is a vicious gang known as the El Rukns. John Podliska is an assistant U.S. attorney in Chicago.
The business of the El Rukns was to traffic in narcotics, cocaine and heroin, and to control a vast area on the south side of Chicago for purposes of selling and distributing those narcotics. They would exact tribute from other people who would want to sell in that area, and they had a reputation, and a well-deserved reputation, for being one of, if not the most successful and the most violent criminal drug-dealing organizations in the Chicago area.
In the spring of 1985, several members split from the gang. They try to move in on El Rukn territory. Revenge is swift and deadly. Chicago's South Side is gripped by a vicious turf war. As the murder rate climbs, the FBI seems powerless to stop the violence. Then, in May, an informant gives agents a tip. Several members of the El Rukn gang have left Chicago. They are hiding out in a house in Cleveland. Many of them are wanted for murder. FBI agents and Cleveland police raid the house and arrest several suspects. One of them is a man named Anthony Sumner. Sumner is a former El Rukn general, which makes him potentially useful. If investigators can turn him, they can get intelligence on the secret of El Rukns.
Sumner, how you doing?
Detectives question Sumner for hours. He implicates himself in a double homicide in Chicago and is facing serious time. Authorities offer to reduce charges, but only if Sumner tells them everything he knows about the El Rukns. Finally, the former El Rukn general agrees to cooperate. As Sumner talks to authorities, a terrifying picture emerges. The El Rukn gang has hundreds of members. They're heavily armed, they're well organized, and they're growing. The entire organization is run by Jeff Fort, a kingpin known for his efficiency and his brutality.
He was at the top, controlling the entire organization. Directly below him were 21 generals, and he preserved his power that way. If anyone tried to seize power from him, from amongst those 21 generals, there were 20 other people who would be in a position to let him know that, and he could retaliate.
Authorities thought they had taken Ford out of commission. In 1983, he was convicted of cocaine trafficking and sentenced to 13 years in a Texas prison. According to Sumner, Jeff Fort continues to run the El Rukns. He uses the prison payphones to contact his gang in Chicago. Sumner's statement is a major break in the El Rukn case, according to Assistant U.S. Attorney Patrick Deedy.
He was the first person to actually confirm what the authorities had thought for a long time, which was that Jeff Fort, who was currently in penitentiary in Texas, was regularly talking on the telephone to members of the El Rukns in Chicago and coordinating or directing activities of the organization.
The El Rukns run their operation out of a converted movie theater on the south side of Chicago.
It had been fortified by the El Rukns and was essentially a fortified fortress. He had people at the headquarters of the El Rukns who were required to sit by that phone 24 hours a day. There was always someone at the phone so that when he called, he could give his instructions, directions, and orders as to what he wanted done with his organization.
For the task force, Jeff Fort's telephone conversations are an opportunity to learn more about the organization.
Yes, Imam. No one questioned what he said and what he wanted done. There was absolutely no debate, discussion, objection to anything that he was saying.
And so the FBI over the summer 1985 began to develop evidence to provide a sufficient probable cause to go and to begin to listen to these conversations.
Agents activated 24-hour wiretap to record the Kingpin's phone calls. Tom Coram is a former special agent with the FBI. In 1985, he is assigned to the Drug Task Force and the El Rukn case.
The technicians installed the wiretap equipment through the telephone company. Nothing was actually installed at the prison. We did all of our monitoring. In fact, in Austin, Texas, which was 40 to 50 miles away from Bastrop, Texas, where the prison was located. We were really stunned when we started hearing the conversation from Fort, because he was speaking with key gang leaders in Chicago, and what we were hearing was just strings of words.
Jeff Fort and his gang are talking in code.
And the kinds of series of words that we would hear said would be things like, in the science of Taku, love, truth, perfect man. And we had no idea what these words meant. And we couldn't establish any form of reference to figure out what he was saying during these conversations.
Agents believe that Fort and the El Rukns are discussing drug deals.
Okay.
But until they crack the gang's code, they can't prove a thing.
One of the Chicago police officers came up with really a very good idea. The Chicago Police Department had uniformed officers almost on a daily basis make some sort of contact with the El Rukn gang members just to let them know that the Chicago Police Department was in the neighborhood and that they were being watched. And so the Chicago detective came up with the idea of having one of the uniformed officers go up to the gang headquarters, speak to one of the gang leaders while Jeff Fort was on the telephone, and see if the gang members would encode what the police officer had said to the gang member and then feed it back to Jeff Fort in the coded form. And what we heard was the gang member come back up to the telephone where Jeff Fort was on the phone at the time and then encode that statement that had been made to him by the police officer. So at that point we learned the code words for one, the word for pound, and the word for marijuana.
Now what about
And the word for marijuana, we found out at that time, was perfect man.
again?
Breaking the El Rukn code is slow, painstaking work. After 2 months, agents only know a fraction of the gang's business.
We realized that we were missing a lot of the calls that were being made from other phones at the El Rukn headquarters in Chicago. So we knew that the operation that we were running in Texas needed to be concluded, and we needed to set operations back up in Chicago and begin monitoring all of the phones inside the gang headquarters in order to get the whole story.
In December, Agent Coram and his team decide to move the wiretap operation to Chicago. They establish a new listening post near El Rukn headquarters. As authorities activate the new wiretap, they encounter a familiar problem.
When we turned the wire on in Chicago, I found that once again I was hearing words that I didn't understand.
The El Rukn gang is using a new code. They may have found out the FBI was listening. Once again, Agent Coram can't understand what they're saying.
It was like we had to start all over again when I thought we would be able to pick up where we left off when we shut the operation down in Texas.
Hour after hour, Coram listens to the recordings. He slowly pieces together phrases.
Yeah, he's talked about New York.
Something is different. Something has changed.
Some of the words I started picking up were words like up. I started hearing words that related to travel, and there hadn't been any words that related to travel during the Texas operation. I started hearing references to New York, and I eventually heard a reference to Libya that really caused me to be really, really concerned about what changes had occurred during the 3 or 4 months that we had not been monitoring the telephones.
It's a chilling discovery. Libya, a rogue nation in North Africa, is suspected of state-sponsored terrorism. A well-armed drug gang, combined with foreign terrorists, could pose a deadly threat to national security. In Chicago, an FBI wiretap reveals that Jeff Fort continues to run the El Rukn gang from prison.
Bring it all back to me.
Although the gang talks in code, authorities learn they are discussing Libya, a country suspected of terrorism. Investigators of the Chicago Drug Task Force spend hours listening to the recorded conversations. To Special Agent Tom Coram, it doesn't make sense. Why is a Chicago drug gang talking about Libya?
I went back to the beginning and started listening to the conversations again, and I started piecing the bits and pieces of the conversation together and came to the conclusion that they were talking about having met with someone in Libya who was going to provide them with money for destroying an airplane here in the United States.
Coram alerts the U.S. Attorney's Office. The drug investigation has uncovered a potential terrorist plot. The FBI calls in the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Special Agent Ned Hamara is assigned to the Terrorism Task Force in Chicago.
We took it seriously because we had no idea whether it was real or not. It was decided that the Terrorism Task Force take over the wire and continue an investigation to determine what, if anything, was going on. The Drug Task Force offered their agents to help with overhearing the wire talk and recorded conversations.
If authorities hope to unravel El Rukn's plans, they need to decipher the new code quickly and completely.
This is the conversation.
At that time, We took our surveillance teams and put them to work.
Fred Wheat is a lieutenant with the Chicago Police Department. His specialty is surveillance. In 1985, Wheat is assigned to the FBI's Terrorism Task Force.
We were brought in because they knew that they would need surveillance, and also that a number of the Chicago police officers had worked El Rukns before and would be helpful in setting up the strategy to work this organization.
The surveillance team's job is to make physical observations that can be compared to the information agents are hearing on the wiretap.
We basically had round-the-clock surveillance on different members of the group who were involved with the conversations with Jeff Fort. We were watching those members and just trying to follow their activities. On one instance, one of the gang members reads a newspaper article to Jeff Fort and substitutes the code word for the actual newsprint. So, I mean, we had a verbatim interpretation of some of those code words because he describes an incident on the south side of Chicago where there was a shooting involving a landlord and a neighbor of some sort. And so we were able to take those code words and go back to previous conversations, insert them into conversations, which solved a lot of our deciphering of some coded conversations.
Okay. That's it.
Slowly, agents crack the new code. Ron Reddy is a special agent with the FBI's Chicago field office.
The calls that are being intercepted at the El Rukn headquarters basically concern two areas. They concern the El Rukn's normal business of engaging in drug transactions, as well as what we are beginning to realize is a plot between the El Rukns and the government of Libya.
How'd it go?
Knowing the violent history of this particular organization, we were afraid that the El Rukns were going to commit an act of terrorism in the United States in order to obtain money from the Libyan government.
From the wiretap, authorities learned that several members of the El Rukn gang recently traveled to Libya. As agents continue to monitor the gang's conversations, the situation with Libya deteriorates. On April 2nd, 1986, a bomb detonates aboard TWA Flight 840 between Rome and Athens. 4 Americans are killed. 9 are injured. The FBI suspects the government of Libya and President Muammar Gaddafi are responsible for the carnage.
On April 4th of 1986, there was a series of conversations between Jeff Fort and a general in the El Rukn organization known as Melvin Mays. And they discussed this explosion on this flight between Rome and Greece. And Mays, at one point in the conversation, indicates that their group would be able to do something like that within 30 to 50 days.
Yeah. It is a terrifying prospect.
I want you to take a video.
Via the decoded wiretap, the task force listens in on Fort's plans. The gang leader wants 2 of his generals, Leon McAnderson and Rico Cranshaw, to make another trip to Libya.
Fort was really concerned about how are we going to convince the Libyans, that we're an organization that can do something for them. One of the things that we were able to determine, he talked about getting newspaper clippings to take back over there to show the Libyans that this is what we've been doing, this is what we can do. Violent things that happen that the Rukns are responsible for. The whole idea was to convince the Libyans that the El Rukns were an organization big enough to commit some significant terrorist activity or acts in the United States on their behalf. We believed it was a real threat.
If McAnderson and Cranshaw return to Libya, federal agents will not be far behind. In Chicago, FBI agents and police wiretap the El Rukn gang. Two of Jeff Fort's generals are planning a trip overseas to convince Libyan officials that El Rukn can perform terrorist acts within the United States. Travel restrictions to Libya make the trip impossible. Ron Reddy is a special agent with the FBI assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force.
The United States had just engaged in at least 2 military actions against the Libyans, and the El Rukns knew that the Libyans were under scrutiny from the United States government. The El Rukns, as well as the Libyans, felt that the safest place for them to meet would be in Panama, which they called the Straw Hat. That was their particular code word for Panama.
Cranshaw and McAnderson, two high-ranking El Rukn generals, will make the trip to Panama City. The task force needs surveillance on both men from the moment they leave Chicago until they return. On May 3rd, Cranshaw and McAnderson leave El Rukn headquarters. A surveillance team is not far behind. The El Rukns board a jet in Chicago, bound for Miami. From there, they fly to Panama. In Panama, Cranshaw and McAnderson are seen entering the Libyan embassy, presumably to meet with government officials. And on May 10th, the two El Rukns returned to the United States.
We knew when they were coming back, and we worked with our colleagues at U.S. Customs and asked them to do a search of these individuals when they arrived in Miami.
They found a document in Rico Crenshaw's luggage, which they photographed. Crenshaw and McAnderson were not aware that this was happening, but the document was in Crenshaw's handwriting.
Basically, they had written a letter that said that they had 5-man cells in cities throughout the United States and that they were interested in trying to destabilize the government.
The next day, on May 11th, the task force intercepts several telephone conversations between the two El Rukns and their leader, Jeff Fort. Cranshaw and McAnderson tell Fort the Libyans have agreed to provide financing. They will deposit the money in a Panamanian bank in the United States. An attorney they met in Panama will contact them shortly. For the task force, it's a terrifying development. But agents don't have enough evidence to prosecute the El Rukn gang on conspiracy charges.
In order for the FBI to establish that a crime has been committed, we must collect enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the conspiracy had actually taken place and that there was an intended goal of the conspiracy. And we had to prove that there was a serious plan to commit an act of terrorism here in the United States.
Agents continue to listen to the wiretap, hoping to learn more.
During June, Fort talks about sending El Rukns over to Libya to learn bomb-making skills. He said we can send some of the soldiers or members over there. They could learn how to make bombs. Those individuals can come back to the United States and teach other members how to make bombs.
As alarming as this scenario is, it's still not enough to prove a conspiracy. Weeks go by. The money from the Libyans never shows up. Fort panics. He will do anything to make the deal.
In Late June, early July, Fort became, he just saw that the money was not going to be coming from the Libyans and that he had to do something, or the Rukns had to do something to show the Libyans, that they were somebody to respect. He talked about damaging a government building. He talked about planting bombs. He talked about blowing up an airplane. And he talked about getting a rocket, one that you can use once and throw away. So we figured, okay, how can we address this issue?
Through the wiretaps we're hearing.
Fort wants to buy military-grade weapons. The task force decides to use it to their advantage by becoming El Rukn's sole supplier.
Okay.
So enter Special Agent Willie Hulan. Willie was on the drug task force. He had already made one drug buy with Alan Knox through an FBI cooperating source.
Alan Knox is a high-ranking El Rukn. Agents assume he is aware of Fort's plans.
So we figured that we'd set up another drug buy with Alan Knox, and at which point Special Agent Hulan could introduce the idea that he had a weapons contact and so on, and that they might be able to supply the El Rukns or somebody else with weapons or any military equipment.
He mentions that he has a friend who works at a military base, a friend who can steal weapons. Knox is interested.
Willie Hulan is an amazing individual. He's cool, calm, collected, works well under pressure. He was ideal for this situation. His knowledge of the street gangs, his calmness and operating sources, and Willie was perfect for this role.
Knox tells Hulan about the kind of weapons the gang wants to buy.
They were interested in grenade launchers, and so when he described the grenade launchers, he said it's the type that Clint Eastwood used in the movie, which obviously is a law rocket.
The M72 Law rocket is the U.S. Army's primary light anti-tank weapon. The shoulder-launched missile can penetrate a foot of armor at a range of over 200 meters. It can destroy a tank, a building, or even a low-flying airliner. Agents cannot allow El Rukn to obtain such a deadly weapon on the open market. But the development does offer unique opportunities.
We decided that why not we supply, or the FBI supply, the El Rukns with a rocket.
Special Agent Willie Hulan negotiates with Alan Knox on the price.
You guys doing all right? Thank you. Yeah.
He tells Knox he can get Law rockets for $1,850 apiece.
Got a man on the inside.
Obviously, we weren't going to sell these guys a Law rocket that they could use or would even work. But that being said, we wanted to sell them a device that looked like a real Law rocket, and on a cursory inspection would appear to them to be a real Law rocket.
And they will buy for that $2,200.
The ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, constructs a dummy Law rocket. Although it looks like the real thing, it does not contain an explosive charge. The ATF also installs a radio transmitter so agents can track the device from a distance. The inert rocket is ready. The trap is set. On July 29th, the task force launches the operation.
Take out an aircraft.
On July 29th, 1986, the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force launches a complex sting operation. Agents will attempt to sell a dummy Law rocket to the El Rukns, a gang of vicious drug dealers who are willing to sell out their own country to Libyan terrorists. Gang leader Jeff Fort takes the bait. He tells Alan Knox to set up the buy.
And we're hearing this on the wiretap after the meeting, so we know that it's going to go forward. The arrangements which were basically given to us by the Rukns was we were going to meet them, or the transaction was going to occur.
The task force meets to plan the sting operation. The sale of the law rocket will go down at a hotel in Lansing, Illinois, 30 miles from Chicago.
Normally, we would have never conducted an undercover investigation like this because of the extreme danger to Agent Hulan. But the fact that we knew that the Rukns were dealing with the Libyans, we had to weigh those risks and ultimately decided that we could do it safely, that we could make the transaction safely and protect the life of our undercover agent.
Surveillance teams will form the outer perimeter, 4 blocks from the hotel.
Like I said, ultimately,
SWAT and undercover teams will form an inner perimeter, stationed in and around the hotel.
What's going to happen with our operation? At this point, we have the north, south.
On July 31st, agents from the FBI, the ATF, the DEA, and the Chicago Police Department deployed to the hotel in Lansing, Illinois. They cannot fail. The lives of hundreds and possibly thousands of people are at stake.
On the night of the law rocket deal, we probably had in excess of 50 individuals spread out through different areas.
Surveillance teams assigned to the outer perimeter get into position. At 6:30 p.m., a car enters the perimeter. There are 2 men inside. Agents are unable to identify either one of them. Detective Wheat's surveillance team picks up the incoming vehicle. He follows it to a gas station nearby. At the gas station, Wheat is able to make a positive ID. Melvin Mays is the driver. Alan Knox is in the passenger seat.
Moments after Melvin had departed the gas station, we saw him go in toward the inner perimeter. We passed on the plate number of the vehicle, the color of the vehicle, the make of the vehicle, all pertinent information that would help us keep this vehicle under surveillance.
At the hotel, task force members get into position.
We had a complement of SWAT, other surveillance people, other case agents in adjacent rooms, down hallways, different floors. Everything to control that situation. We didn't want people from another floor coming up. We didn't want to have citizens who weren't a part of this deal getting caught in the crossfire if that happened. The outer teams were prepared to move in to help secure this area in the event that things went wrong, so that it was plenty of firepower there on hand to deal with any situation that might develop.
Mays and Knox arrive at the hotel within minutes. The sale is about to go down. The task force is ready. They know the Rukns are willing to do whatever it takes to fulfill Jeff Fort's orders and make the buy. On the night of July 31st, 1986, 2 members of the Rukn gang arrive at a hotel in Lansing, Illinois. They have arranged to purchase a light anti-tank rocket. Their goal, to prove to the Libyan government that the Rukns can operate as terrorists for hire. They have no idea that the man they are dealing with is an undercover FBI agent. Members of the Joint Terrorism Task Force can hear every word of the transaction. Detective Fred Wheat and his surveillance team is stationed 4 blocks from the hotel.
We heard a knock on the door. We could actually hear the physical knock. We heard some voices and someone asked who it was, etc. He was admitted into the room. We could hear them negotiate or talk about the sale of the rocket.
The launch. Little something extra I threw in.
You can't see the rocket launcher. Where's it at?
It's on the photo. You know I don't do business like that. Where's the cash?
It's close.
You get your launcher when I get my cash.
A few minutes later, Melvin Mays leaves the hotel. He needs to get final confirmation from gang leader Jeff Fort before the sale can be completed. Mays returns to El Rukn headquarters to wait for Fort's call.
Jeff Fort controlled every aspect of the El Rukn organization, to include this transaction.
The wiretap picks up the phone call between Mays and Jeff Fort. Fort seems leery about the buy. He's worried that it's a setup. Fort instructs Mays to bring a young gang member back with him. They should arrive at the hotel in separate cars. If the buy is a setup, Jeff Fort would rather sacrifice a low-level gang member than risk one of his generals.
In other words, Fort did not want any contact or any trading of money between the undercover agents who he suspected and his generals.
Fort orders him to deliver the money to the hotel and then pick up the law rocket. The sale goes off without a hitch.
What you think? Thank you, sir. Still all there, right? Pleasure doing business with you.
The El Rukns have no idea that the law rocket is a dummy. The low-level El Rukn takes off in the direction of Chicago. Surveillance units follow him onto the Dan Ryan Expressway.
At that point, we had surveillance behind them, in front of them, on the side of them, down the expressway, coming on at certain exits, getting off at certain exits.
Suddenly, the young gang member transporting the law rocket pulls over and stops. Seconds later, another vehicle pulls alongside him. It's Melvin Mays.
What are you doing? Stop.
As it turns out, the gang member's car has broken down. The law rocket is transferred to May's car.
Get back in your car.
We would not have known that it changed from one vehicle to the other or one person to the other unless we had a physical eye on that transaction.
The law rocket had been equipped with a radio transmitter, and we were using electronic equipment and physical surveillance to follow the rocket back to where they eventually stored it.
Mays drives to an apartment building on South Kenwood Avenue, a few miles from El Rukn headquarters. The gang members refer to this building as the Armory.
Then our job really began because at that point we were 24/7 on that location because we had to make sure that that law rocket was not moved.
Special Agent Ned Hamara continues to monitor the wiretap.
A couple days went by. Fort's fears were allayed that they weren't police, and in subsequent conversations, he says, okay, let's buy 5 more. You know, we want 5 more, and we're going to test one.
Task force members are worried. Fort has chosen a target to prove his terrorist capabilities. He intends to kill a Chicago police detective.
The detective who was kind of, he worked for the Gang Crimes Chicago Police Department, who was kind of a thorn for many years in the El Rukn side. They hated him, and they figured, okay, we're going to buy some rockets, but we're going to use one, and we're going to test it on him.
Gentlemen, according to the wiretap,
The attorneys and the agents all made a decision, okay, let's take it down now. Let's not wait any further, because we figured if they tried to test the law rocket, they're going to determine that it's a dummy rocket and it's going to blow a lot of people's cover.
The FBI makes a dangerous call. It's time to take down the El Rukn gang and put Jeff Fort behind bars forever. The FBI has the El Rukn gang on the hook. They have surveillance photos and wiretaps of the gang purchasing a dummy law rocket. From his prison in Texas, gang leader Jeff Fort instructs the El Rukns to buy 5 more rockets. He wants to test fire one of them to prove that his gang can perform terrorist hits for hire.
gentlemen, according to the wire,
We had to prevent the Rukns from actually doing something to try to impress the Libyans. We felt it prudent at that time that we'd gone along far enough, we had enough evidence to at least put them behind bars for at least weapon charges, if not the terrorist activities. We weren't going to take the chances that they were going to get a law rocket from an outside source and use it.
A live law rocket in the hands of a violent gang like the El Rukns would be catastrophic.
I think everybody decided it was time to take it down.
On the morning of August 5th, the task force launches simultaneous raids on El Rukn headquarters and on the apartment building they call the Armory.
That building at 39th and Drexel was a fortified fort. It had steel doors on both the front and rear and iron gates across the other doors. We had to use a burning bar that day to gain entry into the fort to execute our search warrant.
Go, 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 go!
We went from surveillance officers to search and control officers. We began systematically arresting across the city all individuals that were involved in this plot.
In an office at El Rukn headquarters, authorities find travel itineraries to Libya for Rico Cranshaw and Leon McAnderson. A The second arrest team raids the apartment building on South Kenwood Avenue.
I was at the location on South Kenwood. Our main objective was to find the law rocket. We're walking all through the complex, you know, behind the ATF agent who's got the beacon, and he's going upstairs and downstairs and all around. Oh, it's getting fader, we're getting stronger. We were in there for, you know, it seemed like a half hour, and we're walking and we're still not getting it. Finally, we go down into the basement. And this is a rat-infested, roach-infested location. But when we're going down the stairs, it gets louder and louder and louder.
It's getting stronger right down here.
Finally, we decided it's got to be under the stairwell. So we ripped open the stairwell, and sure enough, the law rocket was there, along with about 35 other assortment of automatic weapons that we discovered. Some of them were submachine guns. Who knows, you know, how many weapons were used in crimes or murders or what. The main thing, we got the law rocket back before they were able to determine that it, you know, was an inert or dummy law rocket.
Hands up, hands up, hands up, hands up!
McAnderson and Cranshaw are arrested without incident. Alan Knox is also taken into custody. Melvin Mays is nowhere to be found. On October 30th, 1986, Jeff Fort, Alan Knox, Rico Cranshaw, and Leon McAnderson are indicted on charges of conspiracy, possession of weapons, and use of interstate facilities to carry on unlawful activities. Melvin Mays, who is still a fugitive, is placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. In 1987, McAnderson and Cranshaw are convicted and sentenced to more than 50 years in prison. Melvin Mays eludes authorities for nearly 9 years. In 1995, he is arrested and convicted and sentenced to 3 life terms in prison. Jeff Fort, who is already incarcerated, is sentenced to spend an additional 80 years in prison.
This was the first instance in the United States history that American citizens had been convicted for attempting to commit a terrorist act for a foreign government.
For Chicago police, the El Rukn case is a major victory. A dangerous street gang has been destroyed. For the FBI, the El Rukn case is a battle won in the ongoing war against terrorism. A series of explosions rip through New York City. Sifting through the wreckage in search of one shred of evidence, the FBI and police are desperate for something to lead them to these ruthless terrorists. But the killers are careful to cover their tracks. As the bombings escalate, the FBI is in a deadly race to stop this murderous group with a dangerous cause.
In the late 70s and early 80s, a legitimate Puerto Rican independence movement took hold in the United States. But a splinter terrorist group known as the FALN was suspected of executing hundreds of bombings in major U.S. cities. I'm Jim Kellstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The terrorists were smart, well organized, and deadly, and went to great lengths to conceal their identities. Agents were determined to shut them down before they hit again.
New York City, October 26, 1974. Just after midnight. 5 explosions rock Manhattan. New York City police officers race to the scenes. The biggest explosion occurs in the financial district. NYPD detective Elmer Toro leads the investigation. One look at the devastation and Toro knows he will be lucky to find any useful evidence. It appears the bombers used dynamite.
The problem with bombings is that most of the evidence disappears at the scene. It disappears because how do you trace dynamite? We had no way of tracing dynamite. You can hope for a fingerprint here and there. You can hope for a witness.
Police question everyone in the area, but no one had seen the bomber. The pattern of debris indicates the bomb was placed under a car.
It was put under the engine block, and it picked up the car, and the engine just flew up in the air. Pieces landed up all the way up on the 6th floor. It was a pretty impressive bombing. We did realize quickly that we had a serious problem in our hands.
The only solid clue found at the scene is the tattered remains of what appears to be a leather luggage handle. While police continue to process the scene, they get a call from the Associated Press. One of the alleged bombers called the news agency and told them to look at a phone booth near the bomb site. A patrolman is dispatched to the location. There, under the phone, he finds a letter. He takes it to headquarters to study it for leads. The letter is from a group calling themselves the FALN. In Spanish, the initials stand for the Armed Forces for the National Liberation of Puerto Rico. They are a fringe group with a limited following.
The FALN is not even known in Puerto Rico. It's known to the radical, it's known to those fighting for independence, but in general, you speak to the average Puerto Rican, and the FALN is totally unknown to them.
The former Spanish colony of Puerto Rico is voluntarily part of the United States. In elections, more than 90% of Puerto Ricans vote to continue to be part of the U.S., while less than 5% vote for independence. Now that 5% has turned dangerous. In the letter, the FALN demands that the U.S. abandon Puerto Rico, or more bombs will explode.
These are not people that believe in the electoral system. Their objective is to be violent and, through fear, cause the people to support them.
What began as a bombing investigation is now a terrorist attack. And fighting terrorism is the job of the FBI. The NYPD goes to the Bureau. Detective Toro briefs FBI Special Agent Don Wofford on the evidence found at the bombing locations.
The evidence showed that the device was a dynamite-like high explosive, definitely set off by some kind of detonator, because that's the only thing that sets off the sticks of dynamite. There were plenty of pieces to show a watch had been used as the timing device, and plenty of pieces of a battery showing that the battery had been used to complete the circuit. Pieces of debris showing that this device was in some kind of bag. Several pieces of a handle were found.
It's not much to go on, but it's all the investigators have. They try to find out who made the handle. Perhaps they can use the information to learn who bought it. They then turn their attention to the communique. It demands the U.S. abandon Puerto Rico and release 5 Puerto Rican terrorists from federal prison. The terrorists have been in prison since the 1950s. Decades earlier, on November 1st, 1950, 2 Puerto Rican gunmen try to assassinate President Harry Truman and fail. 2 Washington, D.C. policemen are badly injured in the gun battle. 1 policeman, as well as one of the terrorists, dies. The surviving gunman is sentenced to life in prison. 3 years later, 4 more pro-independence Puerto Ricans are sent to prison after opening fire in the House of Representatives. Now Detective Toro and Agent Wolford theorize friends or family of the 5 may be behind this new terror group.
I was hopeful that working on the background and the current status, maybe, of those 5 political prisoners would be some kind of lead. So we went behind each of those people. We checked their mailing list. We checked their people who visited them.
At the same time, the NYPD and FBI monitor any Puerto Rican activists who have a history of promoting violence. 1 month after the bombing, the NYPD gets a call about a dead body in an abandoned building in Spanish Harlem. Rookie NYPD officer Angel Poggi, on his first day on the job, goes to investigate. Officer Poggi is of Puerto Rican descent and proud to have become one of New York City's finest.
The door was booby-trapped, and he blasted him right across the street and ended his career on the spot.
Although Officer Poggi survived the blast, he lost sight in his right eye. When police search the building, they find no dead body. The phone call was a lie to lure police into a deadly trap. The bomb squad recovers explosive residue and another luggage handle. Like the earlier bombing, they determined this bomb was made of dynamite. From the pattern of the blast damage, they suspect it was probably hung on the back of the door, possibly in a garment bag. Through another phone tip, police recover an FALN communique that proudly claims credit for bombing Officer Poggi. For the NYPD, this investigation has become personal.
They're fighting for Puerto Rican independence, and the first cop they mutilate is a Puerto Rican kid. A Puerto Rican kid, because that's all he was. When they get to your house, you sort of react a little bit different. We knew we had a war in our hands.
The communique says the bombing is revenge for the death of an obscure Puerto Rican poet, Martin Tito Perez.
If you had put Martin Tito Perez's name out in Spanish Harlem, probably a lot of people might have known who he was. But in the rest of Manhattan and in the rest of the United States, of course, nobody would have known who Martin Tito Perez was, except the bomber knew. At this point, we knew we had a Spanish Harlem connection.
A few days earlier, police photographed a Puerto Rican man in Spanish Harlem, handing out leaflets accusing the police of murdering Martin Perez in jail. Although Perez's death was officially ruled a suicide, the activist urges violent revenge against the police. His name is William Morales.
William Morales was a very activist person in Spanish Harlem. He was one of the Puerto Rican independence type people who were at any demonstration, any rally, or whatever. He was a player in the Puerto Rican independence movement.
While Morales seems suspicious, police don't have enough to bring him in. They continue their search for anyone who knows anything about the crippling attack on Officer Poggi, but come up empty. While the investigation stalls, the FALN set their sights on a historic tavern in the heart of New York's financial district. The terrorists are raising the stakes for their deadly cause. A terrorist group called the FALN detonates a series of bombs all over New York City. The FBI struggles to piece together the evidence in time to stop the bombers before they strike again. They are fighting a losing battle. Historic Francis Tavern in the financial district is a popular lunch spot for Wall Street brokers. January 24th, a bomb explodes during the lunch rush. The blast kills 4 people and injures more than 60. The victims are rushed to area hospitals. FBI Special Agent Don Wofford.
It's one of the worst explosive crime scenes I've seen in my bureau career. The entire first floor was nothing but splinters. All of the tables and chairs and walls and everything was just splinters.
Okay, look up here.
The first bombs did not kill anyone. The second targeted a single individual. This time, the bombers clearly intended to kill as many people as possible.
This was a midday bomb, not 3 o'clock in the morning, not a bomb hung in an abandoned tenement, but a bomb put in an active restaurant full of people.
It is a scene that FBI Special Agent Rick Hahn will never forget.
The streets were wet, having been hosed down to hose off the blood and damage to the individuals that had been injured or died at the scene. Seeing that scene impacted me in such a way that I really wanted to make sure that we solved those cases.
At the site of the blast, investigators again find a luggage handle similar to the one found at the earlier bombings. Independently, witnesses tell them that a few minutes before the bomb exploded, a suspicious man left a garment bag.
He's not dressed to be in Francis Tavern restaurant with Wall Street brokers at noon. He must have taken a wrong turn, and why is he leaving that bag? Didn't reach down and turn on any switches, according to all the witnesses. He just dropped it. So that bomb was ticking. That thing was going. And based on the damage it did, it probably had 20 to 30 sticks of dynamite in it. So there's a man walking around Manhattan with a bomb with 20 or 30 sticks of dynamite in it. That takes some dedication.
And his hair was part of...
Witnesses work with a police artist to develop sketches of the suspect. This group was clearly becoming more dangerous, and the FBI intensifies their efforts.
Look, I got this sketch on.
The FBI distributes the sketch all over New York. But investigators can't find anyone who matches the description.
So on these
In the
letters-
lab, technicians review what little physical evidence they have. They turn to the letters left at each of the sites outlining the terrorist group demands.
Their objective was to kill executives from U.S. corporations, and they say that right in the communique. Corporate America is seen in those days as part of the military-industrial complex, and as such, attacking U.S. corporations is as good as attacking the U.S. government.
Right here.
Lab technicians confirmed that all 3 FALN communiques use the same paper, typeface, and letterhead. It's not much to go on.
We found out, to our chagrin, that the complete communique, the paper, the ink, the font, the type, the stencil, the logo, and everything could be bought at 1 million different places in Manhattan.
I think you already know.
The luggage handles do provide lab technicians with a promising lead. The garment bags used to hide the bombs are all one particular model made by one manufacturer. It could be the break the investigators need. The FBI contacts the manufacturer for a list of every store in the New York area that carries the bags. Over the next few weeks, investigators visit each store and show the sketch. But no one seems to recognize the suspect. The bombings continue. 3 months after the Francis Tavern bombing, an FALN communique takes credit for 4 bombs that explode after midnight in Midtown Manhattan. Then, 800 miles away in Chicago, the unimaginable happens. Bombs explode at 2 banks. An FALN communique takes credit. The terrorists are now a nationwide threat. In the New York FBI office, investigators compare the Chicago communique with earlier FALN communiques.
We know immediately when we get the communique from the masthead being the same, from the logo being the same, that this is in fact our FALN.
This gives investigators new angles to pursue.
There's a whole new theory that arises from that, and that is that we can't find them in New York because they're really a Chicago-based group.
The FBI contacts Special Agent William Dyson in the Chicago field office.
This is the first time Chicago is being involved in this group called the FALN. New York has a very large Puerto Rican population, and it appeared as though these attacks were going to be strictly in New York. Now Chicago comes new on the scene. So we were really not sure what to do. We're turning to New York saying, do you have any leads? Can you give us a hint? Where do we go?
Somehow, the FALN must communicate or travel between New York and Chicago. The FBI and police begin rechecking their list of potential suspects.
We can look at our New York people and see what kind of Chicago connections they have. Do they travel to Chicago at all? Do they, in turn, have visitors from Chicago? Is the travel the reverse? Do we see Chicago people in New York, and then do we have a bombing?
Investigators determined that several of the Puerto Rican activists they had been watching in New York have links to Chicago.
We had all of our people that we thought were interested under 24-hour surveillance. And by that, I mean we were sticking with them wherever they went. I would spend weeks and weeks on the street. We just couldn't get to the next level.
Their surveillance is not working, and the terror continues. 9 months after the Francis Tavern bombing, bombs again explode in New York. This time, the bombs also tear through the financial centers of Chicago and Washington, D.C. Once again, the FALN takes credit. After the attack, law enforcement in Chicago and corporate security guards respond by searching around their buildings. Outside the corporate headquarters of an oil company, guards discover a suspicious bouquet of flowers linked to FALN.
And they find 14 roses, high quality roses, like you would give for Mother's Day or something of that nature. Within these roses is this bomb.
The Chicago police bomb tech defuses the bomb. Now, for the first time, investigators will have the opportunity to examine an unexploded FALN bomb, which could provide critical leads. A crime lab technician reads the unique identification numbers on the sticks of dynamite. It is traced to a dam project in New Mexico, but the trail stops there. No dynamite was reported stolen. When that lead proves to be a dead end, investigators try to trace the bouquet of roses.
We've got to go to the florist. Well, it turns out there's something like 800 florists in the Chicago area. We went to every one of them. When I say we, I mean law enforcement. It wasn't just the FBI. We all got together, and we all divided up all the florist shops, and we went to every one of them. Could not find where those roses came from.
Back in New York, the FBI realizes the components of this bomb match the other bombs. Investigators compile lists of all the stores in the New York City area that sell each of the items. They find one store that sells everything.
We identify a store up in the Bronx that sells the particular types of watches that have been used, it sells the propane tanks. More importantly, it sells the types of bags that have been used to contain the bombs.
The FBI theorizes that maybe the bombers got sloppy and bought everything at the same store. At the store, investigators show the owner the composite sketch.
Couldn't say by name who the person was, but that a person similar in appearance to that person had been at this store, definitely buying a whole series of the bags and a whole series of the batteries.
Investigators believe this could be a major break. They show the store owner photos of possible suspects. She can't positively ID any of them, but she does agree to help.
We did solicit the cooperation of the owner of the store. She allowed us to go in and mark discreetly the bags, the watches, those sorts of things, to see whether or not they would be used in a device.
These marks might survive the blast and could confirm the items were purchased from her store. Investigators also established round-the-clock surveillance.
And when a person bought a bag, we would put a surveillance on that individual and try to identify who this individual was and try to match the composite to the purchaser of the bag.
Now the agents will have to wait and see if the terrorists walk into their trap. In New York, a terrorist group called the FALN plants a series of bombs, killing 4 people and injuring more than 60. Now they've expanded their terror spree to other American cities, including Washington, D.C. and Chicago. The FBI has been struggling to get a lead on the group. They learn that items similar to those used to make the bombs are all sold in a store in the Bronx. Agents set up surveillance. But after months of watching the store, they find nothing. Perhaps the terrorists have already stockpiled supplies. Or perhaps they have spotted their surveillance and are once again one step ahead of investigators. Months after the most recent bombing, the case takes a bizarre twist in Chicago. The police there get an odd tip. An informant reports that a man at a garage has been trying to sell sticks of dynamite to street gangs. The responding officer hears hammering and sees a man trying to break open a trunk.
Hey, stand up, put the hammer down now.
The officer also spots dynamite.
Put your hands up where I can see him.
The man says his friend stole it from an apartment that contains even more explosives. The FBI rushes to the apartment. Inside, they find more than 100 sticks of dynamite and other bomb-making materials. FBI Special Agent William Dyson.
So we not only have explosives, but we also have propane tanks. We have a lot of drilled-out wristwatches. We even have communiques.
Investigators feel confident they have discovered an FALN bomb factory.
We definitely have the FALN, there's no question about it. The problem is, who are the people connected with this apartment?
While the bomb squad renders the building safe, investigators question tenants who say no one lives in the apartment. They say they have seen 2 people going in and out, the building's owner, Carlos Torres, and his wife.
One of the things that struck us right away was this lack of sophistication here. The idea of having a bomb factory in your own building. The idea of you being the landlord of the building, the person who would have the access to all the vacant apartments, who would have the keys, just is plain stupid. So now we got 2 suspects, obviously, because not only do they own the building, but residents say they have access. They've seen him up in this apartment.
Investigators search for Carlos Torres, the building's owner, and his wife, Haiti. But they have vanished, which reinforces investigators' belief that they have finally identified members of the FALN. The FBI systematically hunts for the bomb factory fugitives. They begin with a thorough background investigation.
We pretty much followed the normal fugitive procedures, and that basically is to try to make a biography on each one of these individuals. Who are they? Where did they come from? Who are all their relatives? Make a family tree. We make a family tree on these people better than they would make one. We try to find out every person that's related to them in one way, shape, or form.
Agents interview and watch all of their known relatives and friends. But the fugitives have disappeared without a trace. At the same time, the FBI focuses on an odd document found in the bomb factory. It seems all the Chicago FALN suspects belong to the same Latino church committee. The Chicago FBI notifies New York.
Take it a really close
FBI Special Agent Rick Hahn.
There was a suspicion that the FALN had co-opted this organization, this charitable organization, for its own purposes, to use it for travel, to use it for funding.
FBI Special Agent Don Wofford reviews records that show the Chicago suspects used church-paid tickets to fly to New York before several past bombings.
There's lots of travel back and forth, financed by the organization, because ostensibly it is supposed to be lending and giving grants for people to start neighborhood community-type Hispanic activities, like Spanish Bibles and hymnals maybe for a church in a Hispanic neighborhood, that kind of thing.
Investigators also discovered that the church committee includes a familiar face, New York pro-violence radical William Morales. They keep a close watch on Morales and all the members of the church committee, but investigators don't see anything suspicious. They don't have enough probable cause to request wiretaps or search warrants.
We've taken a lot of heat. You know, a lot of people were asking, what are you guys doing? You know, these people keep on blowing up all these, what are you guys doing?
6 months later, at the Mobile Oil Building near Grand Central Station, a bomb in an employment office kills one person and injures 8.
She came in, she put the umbrella on.
The FBI and NYPD arrive and question witnesses. A woman who takes job applications claims she saw the bomber.
She was, you know, I know who left that bomb because I saw her and I talked to her, and I cannot believe a little girl, she kept saying, a little girl like that would leave a bomb in here and blow somebody up. But I saw her, and that's who left it.
The witness says a woman came in carrying a closed umbrella that seemed unusually heavy.
She knew when she hung that device there, when it went off, somebody was going to get hurt.
The suspect took a job application.
She scratched quick a name and an address. The bomb is clicking right next to her. She wants to get out of there fast.
The suspect tried to leave, but the woman wouldn't let her take the application with her. Minutes later, the bomb went off, decapitating the man next to it. Because he absorbed most of the blast, no one else was killed.
I do know that I could recognize her because I saw her and I talked to her.
Investigators asked for the application, hoping the suspect left a fingerprint. If they could find a print, it would be their first piece of solid evidence to the identity of the bombers. The lab uncovers nothing on the front of the application. But on the back, they find what they had been looking for: a single fingerprint. The fingerprint belongs to Haiti Torres, the wife of Carlos Torres, who owned the recently discovered FALN bomb factory in Chicago. New York City police issue a warrant for her arrest for second-degree murder. After a grand jury indictment, her husband Carlos is added to the FBI's top 10 fugitive list. Now that agents have identified their suspects, they must hope for a break that will uncover where the fugitives are hiding before they strike again. A terror group called the FALN plants bombs in major cities around the country, including New York and Chicago, killing 5 people and injuring more than 80. In New York, the FBI suspects that William Morales, a pro-violence radical, is somehow connected to the group. But after months of surveillance, investigators haven't seen anything suspicious. The FBI finally asks Morales if he will talk with them. Surprisingly, he agrees. FBI Special Agent Don Wofford watches through a one-way mirror as Detective Elmer Toro questions Morales about the FALN terrorist group. But he gives them nothing.
Cool, collected, not the least bit upset, not intimidated whatsoever. I don't know nothing about nothing.
Investigators watch for clues to try and determine if it is just an act.
My position was, he's a player. He's definitely a player. Maybe he is a minor league player and he doesn't know anything. I don't believe it, but maybe. But he's a player.
Investigators continue to suspect Morales. But without more evidence, there are legal limits to how far they can go. 2 months later, Queens, New York. Firefighters respond to an explosion in an apartment and find FALN letterhead. FBI agent Wolford arrives just as paramedics take a badly injured man from the apartment. Agent Wolford believes the man may be an FALN suspect and tries to identify him. But the man's face is badly injured and his hands are nearly blown off. Inside the bare apartment, investigators find 3 small pipe bombs. Evidence suggests a 4th pipe bomb exploded while being built, which explains how the man injured his hands. Investigators discover a copying machine and papers printed with the FALN logo. They also find a large stockpile of explosives. Detective Elmer Toro goes to the hospital to try to identify the suspected bomb maker. The man's hands are so badly injured that police are unable to get fingerprints. Detective Toro tells the man that investigators will learn his identity from evidence at the bomb factory.
You can see this.
He might as well admit his name now. But the man can't speak.
Manuel Rodrigo.
I wrote a bunch of names, people that I suspected. Once we got to the name of William Morales, he moved and he agreed without saying who he was. But he basically identified himself.
Detective Toro believes they may have captured the FALN's bomb maker. Toro grills him for information about the organization. But Morales refuses to cooperate. 9 months later, Morales goes on trial for reckless endangerment and possession of dangerous weapons.
Well, Morales didn't fight. Morales claimed a prisoner of war status, no defense, which is a dream for the prosecution.
The judge sentences him to 89 years. Police take Morales to the jail ward of Bellevue Hospital to be fitted with artificial hands before going to prison. Incredibly, despite police guards in the hallway, he manages to escape. Investigators rush to Morales' hospital room.
My initial reaction was, this is just a bad joke. This is just a bad, yeah, right, sure he's escaped. How could he escape? First off, he's physically unable to escape. And secondly, he's up on the 3rd floor.
There's nothing down there, it's just, we don't have him.
They find the window bars and mesh cut open.
The mesh had been spread apart, not more than 6 to 8 inches, just about like this.
I mean, that's straight down.
So he had to squeeze through that hole and get out of the mesh. And then how did he get down 3 floors? And of course, coming to mind immediately was he had help.
Investigators begin to piece together what happened. Someone must have smuggled in a pair of bolt cutters.
William Morales cut himself out from the 3rd floor with his elbows. Because he had no hands.
Investigators believe Morales jumped 3 floors to the ground, where waiting accomplices drove him away. The FBI and NYPD launch an all-out manhunt for Morales and alert the public and police across the country to be on the lookout. But months go by, and the manhunt turns up nothing. Then the terrorists strike again. 6 months after Morales' escape, the FALN begins bombing again in New York, Chicago, and San Juan, Puerto Rico. 1 year after William Morales' escape, just north of Chicago, Evanston police respond to reports of an illegally parked van. They radio in the license, which comes back stolen. Police decide to watch the stolen van to see if anyone comes back.
So they surveil it. I mean, they could have towed it away, but they surveil it.
A short while later, a man and woman drive up to the van and begin loading it.
Police, put your hands up! Let me see your hands! Let me see your hands! Turn around! Face away from me! Stay right where you are!
Police confront the two and find rifles. The suspects have no ID and refuse to speak, leaving police at a loss.
They can't even figure out what nationality they are. So they bring him in. So they got those two people.
A few hours later, in the same Chicago suburb, a citizen calls Evanston police to complain about a truck parked in a wealthy neighborhood. The woman says people have been coming up to the truck and climbing in the back all morning.
A police officer comes out and tries to talk to the driver.
How y'all doing here in the neighborhood?
Why are you here? Well, I'm visiting. Who are you visiting? I'm visiting that person over there. Well, who is that person? Well, I don't know his name and all. And first, vague type of descriptions.
It all seems very suspicious.
You don't know the names at all?
The officer glances into the truck and spots the butt of a handgun.
Gun? Put your hands.
Now he knows he's dealing with armed suspects. And there may be more of them hiding in the back of the truck.
Step out of the vehicle, sir.
Amid a rash of terror bombings, officers in Evanston, Illinois, arrest a suspicious couple. In the back of their truck, police find people with shotguns, handguns, and disguises. Officers arrest them as well. Evanston police photograph and fingerprint their prisoners.
No, I've got the list. Can you run it for
They
me?
also check their identification, but they run into a problem. The names on their IDs prove to be false. Detectives try to interview the suspects, but they refuse to talk. Sensing they are onto something big, the police call the FBI. FBI Special Agent William Dyson looks at the prisoners and immediately recognizes one as a major FALN terrorist.
I've got his wanted poster, top 10 fugitive, and I recognize him. I mean, this is Carlos Torres.
Agent Dyson also recognizes other prisoners as members of the FALN.
It was like looking at this collage that I had above my desk in the office of all these wanted people. So we have the FALN. We know we have the FALN. We're able to identify enough of them. This is the FALN.
The FBI takes a closer look at the false IDs. From past experience, the FBI knows that criminals who use fake ID often include a real address so that it can be used to function in society. Agents notice that several of the IDs have the same Chicago address. The FBI and Chicago police raid that address and find bomb-making materials and more FALN evidence. With information from the captured terrorists, agents raid addresses in Milwaukee, New York, and New Jersey. They take down more FALN safe houses. 6 years after the bombings began, a federal jury finds the captured FALN terrorists guilty of seditious conspiracy, weapons violations, interstate transportation of stolen vehicles, and other charges. But notorious FALN suspected leader William Morales still remains a fugitive.
A group of us got together.
Just before sentencing, one FALN member decides to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. He says the 11 terrorists were in Evanston to rob an armored car to finance more bombings. He also describes a meeting at a Milwaukee safe house.
They had this meeting in which they plot this thing out. And the man leading the meeting, he's got a mask on, so you can't recognize him. But he's got no hands. So immediately, everybody knew it was William Morales.
Fanatical FALN leader William Morales' hands were maimed years earlier while making a bomb. Investigators press for more information, but the cooperating FALN member doesn't know how to find Morales. Agents try a different approach and question their informant about how the FALN recruits members.
We have to know how they bring new people into the group. Once we know that, then we can go after them.
Strong activists who are ready to do.
Investigators learned that the FALN recruits from the ranks of Puerto Rican radicals. Anyone who joins must drop all political activities in order to maintain a low profile. With that pattern in mind, FBI Special Agent Rick Hahn searches through hundreds of files on Puerto Rican radicals. It's a long-shot attempt to identify the remaining FALN terrorists.
We looked for individuals that had stopped attending rallies and things like that, that had made themselves quite well known prior to that time. And we focused on them for surveillances.
More than a year passes before the FBI finally finds one suspect who seems to lead a double life.
Very, very quickly, we realize this guy's clandestine. He's doing things that's not normal.
Agents track the suspect to an FALN safe house. Based on the suspect's behavior, the FBI gets a court order allowing listening devices and wiretaps. In March 1983, 2 years after first gaining cooperation from the FALN informant, the FBI gets a break. Through a wiretap, they overhear a suspected FALN member on the phone asking a mysterious man in Mexico to come to Chicago.
He refused to come up and said, basically, why don't you come visit me? I'm having plastic surgery done. I'm in need of good identification. I can't come into the country. I'll be too easily recognized, that sort of thing.
The mysterious man says to call the same number in a week. In a huge break, investigators identify the mystery voice as that of the FALN's fugitive leader.
By his voice, we were pretty sure that it was probably William Morales.
It's the first time the FBI has heard Morales' voice since his bold escape from New York police custody 4 years earlier. The FBI traces terrorist leader William Morales' phone call to a cafe in Puebla, Mexico. Back in Chicago, the FBI is stuck. They have no jurisdiction in Mexico. Agents plan to continue listening to their wiretap and arrest Morales when he makes his plan to come back to America. But since Morales may have had plastic surgery and significantly changed his appearance, agents ask Mexican federales to secretly photograph him. FBI Special Agent Rick Hahn.
The federales went down to that coffee shop and found Morales seated at a table there.
Morales had severely maimed his hands years earlier while making a bomb. He cannot protect himself or fire a gun. The FBI warns the federales he is probably accompanied by an armed bodyguard. FBI Special Agent Don Wolford.
We told him, these guys got backup, watch it. You just can't walk up with this guy and say, in the car.
The federales don't see a bodyguard and decide to make the arrest themselves. NYPD Detective Elmer Toro.
They were not supposed to take him down. They were supposed to take photographs. And they decided to make the arrest. And William Morales, like a nice trained terrorist, he simply gave up. And I provided the opportunity for his bodyguard to step out of the restaurant.
The bodyguard opens fire, shooting both federales, one of them critically. The other federale returns fire, killing the bodyguard. He takes Morales into custody, but his arrest comes at a great price. The wounded Federale dies on the way to the hospital. New York Police Detective Elmer Toro immediately flies down to Mexico to interview Morales and try to arrange his return.
Morales being in police custody and having killed a police officer, I'm sure was subject to some degree of torture by the federales down there.
Morales greets Detective Toro like a long-lost friend.
He was happy to see me, and he said to me, and I always remember, he says, Elmer, I want to go back with you.
Take me with you.
Detective Toro says he'll draw up the papers, and Morales promises to sign.
Sign anything. Just take me with you. Okay, Willie.
Once Mexican police learn that Morales is going back to the U.S., they treat him better to avoid a possible scandal.
Okay.
Back at his hotel, Detective Toro calls the FBI with the incredible news about Morales.
Getting anything done in Mexico is like, forget it. But now he's talking about, I want to come back. And, you know, we're all saying, thank you, Lord. All right. Let him come back.
But it's not that simple.
All of a sudden I put the 6 o'clock news, and there is the bastard denouncing us.
Morales appears on TV, flanked by radical lawyers from Cuba, the U.S., and Mexico. He now angrily condemns America.
By this time, he's got a battery of attorneys from all over the place. He had people from Cuba, the attorneys from Cuba, very powerful attorneys. And once he was protected by these attorneys, he didn't need Elmer Toro anymore. He didn't want to come back anymore.
Detective Toro now realizes that Morales used him to gain better treatment in jail while waiting for his lawyers to arrive. In the months to come, Cuba uses its influence and money to win the release of Morales.
He's on the beach in Cuba, in Cienfuegos, Cuba, I believe. Sooner or later, Fidel Castro's government is going to go, and maybe we'll see Morales at that point.
With Morales in permanent exile and other key members in prison, the FALN's 8-year reign of terror comes to an end. The FBI and police, through dedicated investigative work and patient long-term surveillance, have defeated one of the most deadly domestic terror groups in U.S. history. On the streets of Washington, D.C., a bomb blast kills a former ambassador and his young assistant. As the FBI investigation closes in on the bombers, the killers set their sights on the agents and their families. The FBI is caught up in a dangerous hunt for a cold-blooded murderer as they target one of the most highly skilled opponents they have ever faced, a bomber who orchestrates the death of a diplomat.
In the 1970s, South America faced a surge of political kidnappings and assassinations. When the killings spilled onto U.S. soil, it was time for the FBI to step in. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Agents struggled to pierce the closely guarded world of diplomats and assassins, trained spies and hired thugs, determined to stop a covert terror war waged by a rogue nation.
Washington, D.C., September 18th, 1976. A man prepares deadly revenge against one of his nation's fiercest critics.
Dear friends of Chile,
The intended victim is former Chilean ambassador Orlando Latelier. The outspoken socialist is in the U.S. condemning the military government of dictator Augusto Pinochet. The Pinochet government seized power 3 years earlier in a bloody coup. Latelier rails against the current Chilean regime for human rights violations and for stripping him of his Chilean citizenship. His outspoken criticism causes one European country to stop lending money to Chile. Just after midnight on September 19th, the bomber prepares to silence the diplomat once and for all. The radio-controlled bomb is secured under the driver's seat of Latelier's car. Now, all it needs is the right radio signal. 2 days later, Latelier drives to work. His assistant, 25-year-old Ronnie Moffett, rides in the passenger seat. Her husband, Mike, rides in back. The car soon arrives on Embassy Row.
Here's an economic one.
Police protecting the embassies call for ambulances and rush to help. Orlando Latelier is barely alive. The bomb blew off his legs and blasted shrapnel through his torso. Ronnie Moffett, hit by flying shrapnel, fights for every breath. Mike Moffett, incredibly, escapes unhurt, although frantically worried about his wife. An ambulance rushes Latelier away just as the FBI arrives. Special Agent Carter Cornick.
When we got there, like all crime scenes, it was an absolute mess. I saw the car, and there was a woman on the side of the road being administered to. The next thing I actually heard through the din of all the noise was a young man screaming, "Dina did it." And I had no idea who or what Dina was.
Under the law, the FBI investigates all attacks against foreign officials. Agent Cornick takes charge of the case.
Well, the first thing that was to do was to get control of the crime scene. A crime scene is a unique thing. It's only there once. And what you do at that crime scene very often determines, ultimately, the outcome of the case.
Agent Cornick requests more agents, including FBI bomb experts, to collect and label every possible piece of evidence.
We had an enormous amount of help. We had more than 150 agents doing the crime scene. We actually had forensic experts doing the crime scene. And that part of the crime scene was actually run by the chief of the explosive unit at my request.
During the search, the FBI hears the tragic news from the hospital that Orlando Latelier and Ronnie Moffett have died. The case is now a murder investigation. At the U.S. District Courthouse, the U.S. Attorney decides this politically sensitive public assassination must be handled with the utmost care and urgency.
In this case, a U.S. attorney was assigned to the investigation from day one. That had never been done before, except in Watergate.
The U.S. Attorney assigns his most relentless prosecutor, U.S. Assistant Attorney Gene Proper.
It was a heinous murder, and I wanted to solve it to make sure that people knew you couldn't do it here. I don't care if Latelier was a socialist, a communist, or somebody on the far right. He was killed in a brutal way on the streets of the District of Columbia with a young woman, neither of whom deserved to die.
Tell me what you found out about
By the second day, investigators begin looking at possible motives for killing Latelier.
The primary motive from the beginning appeared to be a political assassination ordered by a foreign government. We had found out from the State Department that the military dictatorship of Chile was concerned that he had been personally responsible for stopping loans coming to the country.
Buenos Aires, Argentina. FBI Special Agent Bob Shearer does not want to tip off the Chilean government, so he talks with his contacts in Buenos Aires. He wants to find out if they have any information on whether Chilean intelligence may be involved. His Argentine source tells him about a secret program called Operation Condor. Intelligence agencies from right-wing South American countries have agreed to help each other watch left-wing activists and, if necessary, eliminate them. The official believes that Latelier's death may have been Condor's first kill. To get more information, the FBI turns to a U.S. State Department expert on Chile.
We need to know, and we need to know very frankly.
The expert tells them that Chile desperately needs American economic support.
International, but
The same morning of the assassination, the economics minister of Chile was getting off a plane at Dulles Airport to ask the U.S. government for economic aid to Chile.
The expert highly doubts that Chile would endanger its loans by killing Latelier.
So it was difficult for me to believe that a government would, on the one hand, order the assassination of this man, while on the other hand, trying to ask the U.S. government for aid.
2 weeks after the Latelier assassination, a commercial flight from Barbados to Cuba explodes. All 73 people aboard die. After the explosion, right-wing anti-Castro Cubans proudly claim credit. Because of the timing of the bombing of the airliner, investigators wonder if anti-Castro Cubans may have also had a hand in the assassination. Latelier was a socialist and an admirer of Fidel Castro. It seems like a long shot, but right now it's the only lead the agency has. Agent Cornick asks the FBI lab to compare the Latelier bomb against past anti-Castro Cuban bombs. Technicians have little to work with because the explosion destroyed most of the evidence. From what little remains, they determined that the bomb is unlike anything they've ever seen before. FBI Special Agent Larry Wack.
The lab came back and said basically the Latelier bomb doesn't match other right-wing Cuban bombs that we have examined already. We didn't want to hear that. That's the last thing you want to hear, that you don't have a match.
But because of the right-wing Cubans' history of assassinations, investigators can't entirely rule them out.
We were trying to keep an open mind that perhaps we have a new bomb maker on the set that we're not aware of.
Having hit a dead end, investigators set up a tip line to solicit information from around the world.
Thousands of leads, literally thousands of leads, came in by telephone. A special 1-800 number was established to handle the leads. We had leads coming in from Europe, leads particularly from Latin America.
One lead comes from a New York area reverend who says 3 Chilean intelligence agents flew out of New York shortly after the assassination. FBI Special Agent Larry Wack interviews the reverend.
And it was evident, you know, in the first 5 minutes of the interview that this guy had seen nothing. So, of course, I'm trying to zero in on, look, you know, who exactly saw these 3 Chilean agents?
The reverend got the tip from some friends, but he will not reveal their names.
I told the reverend, I said, look, get back to the people that supposedly saw this and get them in touch with us.
While he's waiting, Agent Wack heads to New York's JFK Airport. He follows up on the reverend's tip that Chilean agents flew out shortly after the assassination.
Because these items should be noted by the...
No one can confirm the story. The case stalls again.
There's nothing.
few weeks later, Agent Wax says goodbye to his fiancée, who leaves for her job as an airline flight attendant. He has no idea he is not the only one who watches her go. In the airport parking lot, a threatening stranger confronts Wax's fiancée. The bombers are striking back, hitting the FBI close to home. A car bomb in Washington, D.C. kills former Chilean ambassador Orlando Latelier and his assistant. As the FBI begins investigating the murder, Special Agent Larry Wax's fiancée is threatened. The frightened flight attendant calls Agent Wax.
I was absolutely appalled that something like this would happen, that whoever it was didn't have the guts to come after me, that they had to go after her.
Agent Wax believes he must have interviewed someone close to the assassination.
I don't know what we did, but we struck a nerve somewhere. And now we got to go back and re-examine what we've been doing, and myself, particularly what I had been doing, who I had been talking to and so on, to see where this threat may have emanated from.
Agent Wax's fiancée helps create a sketch of the man who threatened her. Agents show the sketch to Chilean immigrants throughout New York, trying to find someone who recognizes the man. But no one seems to know him. Washington, D.C., 1 month after the bombing.
Clearly said in Townsend versus New York.
Assistant U.S. Attorney Gene Propper and FBI Special Agent Carter Cornick receive a possible lead.
We got 2 Chilean.
The State Department provides photos of 2 suspicious Chilean intelligence officers whose real names are unknown. A month before the Latelier killing, at the U.S. Embassy in Paraguay, 2 Chileans requested visas for what were obviously false passports. One of the men did not look Chilean, and the 2 openly admitted being intelligence agents. They claimed they needed the visas to attend a meeting with the CIA in Washington, D.C.
Well, I'll need to see your passport.
The ambassador decided to take the unusual precaution of secretly photographing the passports.
Thank you.
When the CIA denied knowing the 2 agents, the ambassador canceled the visas. Investigators believed the photos could relate to their case. FBI Special Agent Carter Cornick.
We had these 2 photographs, but we didn't know who they were. If we could identify those 2 people, we could take the case a step further.
The mug shots, we got to roll through the books. We got to roll these guys.
A few days later, investigators get a lead that again points them to Cuba. A Venezuelan newspaper prints a story claiming right-wing Cubans based in the United States killed Latelier. It names the prime suspects as the Ayala brothers from New Jersey. Investigators know Enrique and Sanchez Ayala well. They are founding members of a violent anti-Castro group called the Cuban Nationalist Movement. They are suspects in several recent high-profile bombings, including a Russian ship in New York 5 days before the Latelier assassination, and an attempted bombing at the New York Academy of Music, where Cuban artists were set to perform. The FBI begins to wonder if the Ayala brothers also targeted Chilean socialist Orlando Latelier. In one of New Jersey's Cuban neighborhoods, an FBI agent tracks down Enrique Ayala to find out.
Brian, I'm with the FBI.
When the agent asks him where he was the day Latelier was killed, Ayala gives an odd reply.
That's my trump card. It's an ace up my sleeve.
Investigators in Washington, D.C. find his comments suspicious.
Well, I think there's
Assistant U.S. Attorney Gene Propper.
Right away, when you hear something like that, you begin to think, what's this guy want to hide?
Propper asks the FBI to serve Ayala with a subpoena to appear before the grand jury.
I told you.
In the United States, no citizen is obligated to talk to the police or the FBI. If the FBI comes up to you on the street, you can say, "Get lost." There is an obligation to testify before the grand jury if you're brought in by subpoena.
An agent heads out to serve Enrique Ayala with the subpoena.
FBI.
Ayala's wife says she doesn't know where he's gone. He's disappeared.
Ma'am? Hi,
Agents question anti-Castro Cubans, demanding that they give up Ayala. The pressure finally gets to Ayala, who agrees to come in.
Coming in, please have a seat.
At Propper's office in Washington, D.C., Ayala proclaims he had nothing to do with Latelier's death. Investigators ask why he made the comment about an ace up his sleeve.
You might have some information.
Ayala says he was just joking, pulling the agent's chain.
No, can't help you.
Propper grills Ayala before the grand jury. He denies any knowledge of the Latelier murder and takes the fifth when asked if he's recently traveled to Chile. New York City. A few days after Ayala's testimony, Special Agent Wack gets a call at home from a suspected anti-Castro bomber.
Do what?
He said that, I'm coming over to your house in a minute to talk to you.
Agent Wack fears he is in danger.
The big question was, how did he get my phone number? And more importantly, how did he know where I lived? So I grabbed my neighbor, who was a New York City police officer, told him, grab your gun, come outside, and I told him what had happened, that I had gotten this phone call, and I don't know what's coming next. We hid outside in an alleyway, and within a period of about 3 minutes, here comes this nationalist guy at my front door.
Yeah, it's him. He recognizes me.
We had an altercation out in front of my residence where he was telling us, that they didn't have anything to do with the threat on my fiance, and, why don't you back off of our group? I pretty much told him that the next time you show up at my front door, you're going to go home in a body bag. I was extremely mad at this whole situation. I mean, it was bad enough that my fiance gets threatened, and now I got these bombers showing up at my front door, and you're like, what's next?
Far from backing off, Agent Wack cranks up the pressure. If the Cubans are nervous, the FBI must be close to finding their connection to the assassination, and possibly even the bomber. Agent Wack goes after the Cubans, hunting for anyone with information.
If you think you're going to intimidate the FBI into not investigating, you're making a mistake. You're going to make them investigate harder.
I don't know nothing about it.
The people he approaches give him the cold shoulder or even insult him.
Hey, get away from me.
But he continues to hunt for leads. Finally, 5 weeks after Latelier's murder, Agent Wack meets a former Cuban bomb maker who says he wants to talk. It could be a major break in the case. Or it could be a setup for a hit on an FBI agent who's getting too close to the truth. A powerful remote-controlled bomb kills former Chilean ambassador Orlando Latelier and his assistant in Washington, D.C. The FBI believes the key to the case may be hiding in the New York anti-communist Cuban community, an organization known for targeting outspoken socialists. FBI Special Agent Larry Wack doggedly hunts for leads until a former anti-Castro bomb maker tells him he wants to talk.
And the thing that he couldn't sleep with was he didn't care that Latelier died. He couldn't sleep with the fact that the girl was killed, Ronnie Moffett. And that's where he drew the line.
The bomb maker says he's heard that Enrique Ayala, the leader of a violent anti-Castro group, has met several times with a Chilean covert contact. He said the Cubans wanted support from the right-wing Chilean government. Agent Wack uses the information to question other informants. They tell him that Ayala has been seen meeting with a tall, blonde Chilean with a military bearing.
One informant was telling me that the nationalists were referring to him as El Flaco, or the tall, thin one.
Agent Wack has now confirmed the link between a Chilean agent and the Cuban nationalist movement.
Now you've got evidence of a Chilean agent in contact with the nationalists, and you've got the nationalists with a track record of bombings going back quite a few years. So, you know, it's starting to look like a duck and walk like a duck.
The FBI focuses their investigation on Chile. In Santiago, FBI Special Agent Bob Shearer follows up on Agent Wack's discovery of Enrique Ayala's link with Chilean officials. Chile's Interpol representative tells him that Ayala visited Chile 2 years earlier and may have met with the Chilean government or even the Chilean intelligence service. With this new information, Assistant U.S. Attorney Gene Proper subpoenas Enrique Ayala and 2 of his friends to appear once more before the grand jury. A few days later, Proper gets a death threat on his private line.
What's wrong?
Proper believes they must be doing something that's making a guilty party nervous.
That means we're doing it right.
But instead of backing off, Proper and FBI Special Agent Carter Cornick step up their investigation.
We decided we're taking the 5th.
They bring in Enrique Ayala, who says he and his 2 friends will take the 5th in front of the grand jury and refuse to answer any questions. Investigators must continue to search for some way to crack open the case and get someone to talk.
Gentlemen?
FBI Special Agent Carter Cornick.
This thing is dragged on now, nothing happened, but it's not coming to a head. How the hell do we get on track?
A month later in New York, the Secret Service calls in FBI Special Agent Larry Wack. They've arrested a counterfeiter who specializes in making fake IDs who wants to cut a deal. He claims to know of a plot by the Ayala brothers to kill the U.S. Attorney General and Prosecutor Eugene Proper. After months of investigation, this could be the break in the case the FBI has been waiting for. The break that will finally lead them to the bombers. In Washington, D.C., a remote-control bomb kills a former left-wing Chilean ambassador and his assistant. In New York, 8 months after the assassination, a counterfeiter contacts the FBI. He provides fake IDs to an anti-communist Cuban group suspected of the bombing. The counterfeiter claims to have inside information and wants to cut a deal with FBI Special Agent Larry Wack.
He laid out a situation that he was in the process of making up false driver's licenses and passports and whatnot for some of the guys in the nationalist movement. You know, your first assumption is this crowd's getting ready to take off. They're going underground.
The counterfeiter says the Cuban nationalists told him that if their leader, Enrique Ayala, goes to jail, they will kill the U.S. Attorney General and Assistant U.S. Attorney Gene Proper, the prosecutor on the case.
Well, if what you're saying is
Agent
true,
Wack offers to speak to the Secret Service on the counterfeiter's behalf if he will inform on Enrique Ayala and his brother Sanchez.
okay? And you're willing to follow through on this?
The counterfeiter reluctantly agrees. He says he's supposed to meet with Sanchez Ayala soon to deliver a false ID. The night of the meeting, Agent Wack watches from hiding. The counterfeiter arrives carrying a false ID hidden in a magazine.
We were able to corroborate a lot of what he was telling us without him knowing it.
When they see Ayala exit the restaurant with the same magazine, the FBI knows that their new informant told the truth about working with the Ayalas. Maybe the Ayalas can lead them to their Chilean contact. Proper again calls Enrique Ayala into court. but he fails to appear. FBI agents can't find him anywhere. He's become a fugitive. This only adds to investigators' belief that he played a role in Latelier's assassination. 2.5 weeks later, the investigators' inside man delivers more fake IDs to Sanchez Ayala. At the end of the meeting, Sanchez rips $1 in two and gives the counterfeiter half. Sanchez says that a tall, blonde Chilean may contact the counterfeiter with the other half of the bill.
You know, this was turning into a James Bond spy novel here with the $50 bills and everything, the way this thing was going. But there was that tall, blonde Chilean again that we already heard about surfacing. He was this continuous, elusive guy.
The FBI doubts this mysterious Chilean intelligence agent will come all the way to America again to meet with their counterfeiter. Chilean intelligence can fabricate their own high-quality fake IDs. Agents follow Sanchez Ayala to Miami, hoping he will lead them to his fugitive brother. But after days of trailing Sanchez, they lose him. 2 weeks later, the FBI gets an unlikely break when a tall, blonde Chilean approaches the counterfeiter. At first, the Chilean casually chats with him about motorcycles. But before he leaves, he says that a friend of Enrique Ayala's will be in touch for more false IDs. When he hears about the tall, blonde Chilean, Agent Wack arranges an urgent meeting with the counterfeiter. Agent Wack shows the counterfeiter a photo layout, including a passport photo of a Chilean intelligence agent who tried to get into the U.S. using the false name Juan Williams.
Showed him the pictures, and he goes right to the Williams photo, and he says, "This is the guy that I met, absolutely no question about it."
Investigators finally have a name to link to the mysterious stranger. They go to Chile to try and learn all they can about the man who calls himself Juan Williams. In Santiago, FBI Special Agent Bob Shearer discovers that no one named Juan Williams works for the government or the armed forces. Washington, D.C. It has been 1 year since the assassination of former left-wing Chilean Ambassador Orlando Latelier and his assistant Ronnie Moffett. Investigators believe the right-wing anti-Castro Cubans working with people inside Chile's intelligence agency possibly orchestrated the murder. Assistant U.S. Attorney Gene Proper tries to make sense of the lead so far.
The case started to slow down in mid to late 1977 because while we had this information, we didn't really have a whole lot of proof. And we were trying to get information from Chile without a lot of success.
Investigators decide to approach the Chilean government directly and demand information on the intelligence agent who is meeting with Cuban bomb makers in the U.S. and uses the false name Juan Williams.
Chile's got what appears to be a bona fide intelligence agent running around with a bunch of bombers in the United States, and this is going to be very embarrassing for Chile. They better have a good answer for this one.
In Santiago, Chile,
what is it that I can do for you today?
Agent Shearer tells a Chilean official that the FBI wants to interview Juan Williams and another intelligence agent who also applied for a U.S. visa using a false name.
You're quite sure? We have some photos of them.
The U.S. could prosecute both men for filing for a visa with a fake passport. The Chileans say they will look into it.
We have a very large organization.
After waiting a month with no reply from Chile, Proper files court papers with an unsealed cover letter that includes the agents' false names and implies they played a major role in Latelier's murder. If the Chilean government masterminded the killing, Proper intends to hold them accountable.
I summarized what I thought the evidence would show and put it in a letter that was outside the package. Nobody had ever seen that done before, and the State Department sort of laughed about it. But I thought when that became public, and I made sure it became public because it was not a sealed document, the Chileans would panic and would start to hear things. Then what happened is the photographs which were in there sealed leaked to the press.
News stories hit front pages all over the world, accusing the Chilean intelligence service called DINA of the killing.
And the Chileans went crazy because all of a sudden it was saying DINA was involved with the Cubans in killing Latelier. Didn't say 100%. And the Chileans started calling us. They wanted a meeting with the Secretary of State. They wanted a meeting with the Attorney General.
The newspaper articles unleash a flood of tips for the FBI. One newspaper identifies the mysterious blonde intelligence agent known as Juan Williams.
You can see on the screen there.
In a shocking twist, it reveals that he was born in the U.S. The FBI is stunned. Could it be possible that the Chilean assassin is an American? While the FBI investigates the 1976 car bomb killing of Orlando Latelier and his aide Ronnie Moffett, newspapers all over the world pick up the story of two Chilean intelligence officers suspected of the killings. When the story breaks, the FBI gets word that a newspaper has identified the intelligence agent known as Juan Williams.
Juan Williams. What do you know?
One Chilean newspaper just identified.
It appears he's an American.
Michael Townley.
All right, run that name through U.S. passport, get on the horn right away.
FBI Special Agent Carter Cornick.
When it turned out one of them was a U.S. national, that made our position so much stronger. And why was a U.S. national working for the Chilean intelligence service?
The U.S. Passport Office reports that there is a Michael Townley who matches the description of the blonde intelligence agent currently registered as an American living in Chile. He's 36, born in Iowa, but grew up in Chile. Agents head to Fort Lauderdale to follow up another tip that Juan Williams is really a man named Kenneth Einart. He's been buying electronic surveillance equipment for the Chilean government. At an electronics store that sells hidden microphones, phone taps, and other high-tech surveillance equipment, the store owner identifies the Juan Williams passport photo as Kenneth Einart. The owner provides records showing that Einart shopped at the store the day the bomb killed Latelier. He also provides an official letter from the Chilean government authorizing Kenneth Einart and Michael Townley to make purchases on their behalf. The FBI now believes that Kenneth Einart is an alias for Michael Townley and that the Chilean government is somehow involved in the killing. Now, the FBI has their first solid suspect in the case. The next day in New York, FBI Special Agent Larry Wack meets with a counterfeiter turned informant. He's been watching a group of anti-communist Cuban nationalists the FBI suspects of working with the government of Chile. Agent Wack wants to know how they are responding to the news that the FBI has identified their Chilean contact, Michael Townley.
Everybody in the exile community with the nationalists and everywhere else went scrambling. It was like, uh-oh, cat's out of the bag. They know who he is. And it was time to run.
Agent Wack pressures the counterfeiter to set up a meeting with a key Cuban nationalist suspect before he runs.
I told the counterfeiter, I said, just tell him flat out that I came to see you. I found out that you're hanging with the nationalists again, and that I paid you a visit, and you're getting subpoenaed to the grand jury.
The plan works, and the counterfeiter meets with the suspect to ask his advice.
They ask you to testify.
The suspect tells him to take the fifth and say nothing. The counterfeiter keeps asking why.
Because
we did it, meaning Latelier. We did it. We know it. They know it. Let them prove it. Which is exactly what we wanted.
The FBI now has an informant's claim that a nationalist confessed. But they still need some physical evidence linking the Cubans with Michael Townley.
We couldn't connect him to the murder. We had no evidence he was involved in the murder, but we certainly believed it because he was the blonde Chilean who was dealing with the Cuban nationalist movement that internally had said they're involved in the Latelier murder, and they were now fleeing. They were running from us.
Assistant U.S. Attorney Gene Proper and FBI Special Agent Carter Cornick tried to fit together the evidence.
You know, it's one thing to have a source who you may or may not trust 100% tell you one thing. It's another thing to have, you know, actual proof.
Investigators desperately need someone to cooperate and confess to what happened. They hope it will be Michael Townley, but the agents have to find him first.
The next step was to go to Chile and to try to, in some way, force the government of Chile to cooperate with us in the investigation. The fact that these two men had applied for false passports to come to the United States a week before the assassination was of real interest to us.
Over the next 2 weeks, Proper and the U.S. government put tremendous pressure on Chile. Proper prepares official letters through the World Court requesting the chance to talk with Townley.
I took him to the chief judge in Washington, and he signed the documents. He asked me how the case was going. I'll never forget this. He said, "How's the case going?" I said, "It's a very tough case, Judge. It's just very tough." He said, "I know that." He said, "But God makes people who do things like this make mistakes. All you've got to do is find the mistakes."
To find the mistakes, Proper has to get to Townley. But the prosecutor is still getting resistance from the Chilean government.
I'm sorry.
And the Chilean government said, "You know, this is going to make the government fall. We can't give over an intelligence officer." We said, "He's an American. He committed a crime in the United States. We want him."
We were not allowed access to people that we wanted to have access to, members of the Chilean intelligence service. But at the same time, other Chilean officials were cooperating with us quietly.
Behind the scenes, the Pinochet government quietly cuts a deal with the U.S. They will hand over Townley if the U.S. promises not to use his testimony against Chile. The U.S. agrees. The next day, Chilean police take Michael Townley for a drive. He hopes that the intelligence service will protect him, perhaps even reward him with a long vacation in a remote area.
Just take me far and get out of here, huh?
He has no idea what is really waiting for him.
On vacation, huh?
Chilean intelligence agent and bombing suspect Michael Townley thinks he's about to embark on a vacation. But FBI agents are waiting at the airport for authorities to turn him over. FBI Special Agent Carter Cornick.
There was an Air Ecuadoriano flight going from Chile to New York. And the plane was held by the Chilean government on the runway until we got there. Townley was turned over to us. He was disoriented. He was afraid. He could not believe that the Chilean government had betrayed him.
On the flight, Townley refuses to talk without a lawyer. Once in the U.S., the FBI holds Townley at the Marine base in Quantico, Virginia. They suspect him of murdering a Chilean diplomat and enlisting right-wing Cubans to help him. But the only real charge they have against him is using a fake passport. Townley meets with his attorney, while Assistant U.S. Attorney Gene Proper prepares for plea negotiations.
And it's going to be very difficult because we really don't have a murder case against Townley. We still did not have any case against Michael Townley except the passport violation case.
Miami, Florida.
Hey man, hold up. That's Ayala.
Agents get a break when an alert Miami police officer spots one of the men linked to Townley in the murder, Cuban nationalist leader Enrique Ayala.
You're Enrique Ayala, aren't you? No, sir. Please take off your sunglasses. This is my identification, sir. Seguro que sí.
Agent Cornick and Prosecutor Proper use Ayala's arrest and the arrests of other nationalist suspects to pressure Townley.
Enrique Ayala has been arrested.
We went to Townley and his lawyer and said, your time's about out. We've just rolled the Cubans up. We're going to make the deal with the first person who's willing to talk to us. We knew the Cubans would never talk, but we didn't tell that to Townley and his lawyers. Townley has to think we know what happened. We singled him out and brought him to the United States. He has to worry that we have more information than he knows about. But all we had on Michael Townley was a passport violation and knowledge that he had met with the Cubans. But unless the Cubans talked or Townley talked, we didn't have enough to bring a case against anybody.
Don't worry, Michael.
After hours of negotiation, Townley agrees to cooperate in exchange for a 10-year sentence. Townley reveals that he worked as a highly skilled agent and assassin for Chilean intelligence.
He worked for the Chilean secret police, which was run by a general, and he viewed his assassinations as legitimate orders from his government. The Chilean secret police wanted Latelier dead because Latelier was viewed as a spokesman who was in the United States and creating a fuss against the Pinochet government. He was meeting on Congress with senators, he was talking around the world, and the Pinochet government was a very repressive, right-wing government, and Latelier was very well-spoken, and he was causing them some grief.
This was not Townley's first assassination.
Given an order, military operation, and that's what...
As an expert in electronics and bomb making, Townley helped commit assassinations in South America, North America, and Europe.
This man, without question, was the most dangerous man I have ever met. This is a man who bragged about his role in building bombs that killed other people. And the justification? Latelier was a soldier, I was a soldier.
Townley says he made a bomb in a motel room and attached it to Latelier's car at night. The Cubans were anxious to create ties to the right-wing Chilean government and agreed to help. Townley arranged for the Cubans to set the bomb off. He then flew to Florida, leaving 2 of the Cubans with a remote control. He says he doesn't know who pushed the button.
The Cubans had no interest in Mr. Latelier. They wanted a relationship with the Chilean secret police for several reasons. Chile could give them sanctuary when they were in trouble in the United States. They had a very similar political ideology, was very right-wing. And they could get, they thought, material support, maybe money, from Dina.
To prove Townley's story to a jury, the FBI buys an identical car and has him build an exact copy of the bomb.
All of this was filmed by the FBI so that it could be used at trial, actually to placing the bomb up underneath the car. All of the components were identical, the car was identical, and the question was, would the results be identical? We didn't know.
Stand by for detonation. 3, 2, 1.
When the dust cleared, I looked at the car that had just been blown up. It was the same car that I had seen 2 years ago in the crime scene. I could not believe it. I turned to look at Mike Townley. Mike Townley's face was ashen. He turned to me and said, "I'd like to leave." I had 2 of the other agents take him back to the car.
Townley was somebody who had been involved in several murders, but never close up. He always did it at a distance. He never saw the victim. He was a soldier. He was told to assassinate somebody. He put a bomb somewhere. He did something, but he didn't do it close up. And when he saw the effects of it, He was apparently very affected by it.
2.5 years after the Latelier assassination, the Ayala brothers and an associate go on trial. The photos of the 2 blown-up cars provide the crowning piece of evidence.
The resemblance was remarkable. At the end of 7 weeks of trial, the jury, when it deliberated, asked for 2 pieces of evidence. One were the pictures of the cars. An hour later, they came back guilty on all counts.
The court sentences Enrique and Sanchez Ayala in the murder plot. But in a retrial, their convictions are overturned on a technicality. Over the next 20 years, 2 other anti-Castro nationalists and 3 Chilean officials end up serving time for the Latelier killing. FBI agent Carter Cornick sees Latelier's murder as a tragic misunderstanding.
I think he was assassinated for 2 reasons. One, for what he had done, which was stopping government Dutch loans to Chile. And 2, they perceived him as a threat, which in reality he was not. The Chilean military believed that Latelier was forming a government in exile in the United States. It was simply not valid. It's just paranoia.
Documents uncovered after the fall of Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet would later confirm that the Chilean government ordered the death of Latelier. The FBI's relentless pursuit of the killers solved a difficult case and put rogue nations on notice.
I think it sent a message to other governments considering extraterritorial sanctions, assassinations. Think twice before you do it.